Good evening all and welcome to tonight's compilation. I would like to wish a very special happy birthday to Sam Kramer. I hope you've had a wonderful day. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Let me start off by saying that this is a true story that happened to me when I was around 13. I'm 27 now. Whether you believe me or not is up to you. My dad used to be part of a small hunting club in Alabama, just a handful of guys he grew up with there. Once a year, we would drive down to the small town of Elba to camp for a few days and go hunting. There were a few different areas of land around the town that the club owned, and club members could go hunting there. One of these pieces of land was nicknamed the cemetery, because it had an old cemetery on it. Nothing really creepy about the cemetery per se. It was in the woods and the graves were of slave owners and the graves of slaves. Now in the area, the land nicknamed the cemetery, there are 5 or 6 green fields, a cleared out area where there are no trees, just grass and a buck hunt to hunt in. A buck hunt is a treehouse you sit in to wait for deer to walk out onto the green field. This particular evening, we were going to hunt on Greenfield 1, the plot directly behind the old cemetery. The evening started off normally enough. My dad parked the truck and we walked down the trail to the buck hunt. We climbed up and started to wait and watch in the woods. A little bit of a pastime of my dad's was to tell me that he was going to go for a short walk to see if he could maybe see any deer on the trail. Keep in mind I'm about 13, not a big deal, I've hunted by myself before and I'm not afraid of being alone in the woods. Besides, it was still pretty light out. Okay. He climbed down and it was just me, my .32 caliber Marlin rifle, the grass field in front of me and the dense woods around me. This is where things start to get strange. I sat there for an eternity, or what felt like an eternity, and it was now almost twilight. My concern for my dad had grown, because he was still not back. I was worried that maybe something had happened to him or maybe he got lost. However, he's an experienced hunter, and if he was lost he would yell or fire off a shot, but the woods had been dead silent. I figured maybe he found a good spot that he wanted to hunt in the twilight/dusk hours for the day, because that's prime time for hunting. So I focused my attention on the grass field in front of me, just watching, listening, and waiting for a deer to walk out on the field as the light of day began to fade. Just then, across the field, I saw and heard some brush moving and breaking. The thought did cross my mind that it could be my dad, but I highly doubted it. No way it would be him. That would be incredibly dangerous and stupid. I raised my rifle, pulled back the hammer, and aimed it at the moving brush, patiently waiting for what I hoped would be a deer. Just then, a girl floated out of the woods and onto the grassy field. She was transparent, with a long, flowing dress and long white hair. She floated from one side of the field to the other and disappeared back into the woods. I watched her for a solid minute or two and couldn't believe my eyes. I was petrified. A short time passed and now it's pitch black and I'm still alone. My concern for my dad was turning into panic, but I was too afraid to yell or to look for him in the pitch dark woods where I just saw a ghost. I sat there for hours, terrified and alone in the darkness. Thankfully, he finally returned, and he acted as if he hadn't been gone that long at all. I asked him where the hell he went, and he said he just went for a short walk up the trail, turned around and came back. The timeline made no sense. He was gone for hours. It was unlike him to leave me alone for that long. He was adamant he had only been gone a little while, maybe 15 to 30 minutes. We walked down the trail back to his truck, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. The whole experience still confuses me to this day. Was the ghost I saw an old slave or slave owner buried in the woods behind me? Or something else entirely? Did my dad go through some time walk where time sped up? I don't know. I never went hunting there again, and don't plan on ever returning either. I was camping with my husband and his family at a small remote lake in our state. New Mexico has always had many stories of paranormal activity just about everywhere. Well, on this camping trip, there were about 10 of us off the shore, off the lake, and one other group of people camping, maybe 6 of them. And the next site over off the shore. It was a nightmare, and both our group and the other group were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, telling stories, when all of a sudden we all heard what sounded like a little girl yelling for help. The other group of campers asked us if we had any children in the group, which we didn't, and neither did they. But we were all positive of hearing a little girl and decided to search the area where we heard the noises from. Rather quickly we found something together. There was a field behind our campsite, and we all saw a very tall, pale white figure standing 100 feet away from us in the field, making the noises. We all agreed this thing looked maybe 6 feet tall, skinny and white as could be. Everyone got quiet, but we all were together and still made our way closer to investigate. Whatever it was saw and started backing off as we got closer, until it vanished beyond some trees. Every single person in both campsites was freaked out by this, and that night while we tried to sleep, we continued to hear those little girls calling for help. It still gives me chills thinking about it. I come from a remote island called Rendova, located in the Solomon Islands, and have since moved overseas, hence access to the internet. Across from our island is another island called Tetepare. The story of Tetepare is really interesting, because it was abandoned completely by the inhabitants a few centuries ago. Just like the villagers fled the island to come to neighboring islands, such as my own, and here we are a few centuries later. Because of the lack of humans on the island, it is known for its biodiversity, and few researchers come every now and again to have a look. If you're looking for cool, remote places to travel after the pandemic, I highly recommend it. The interesting part of Tetepare for me was, why did everyone just leave? If you were a villager back in the day, it would have been a great place to live. Volcanic soil to grow crops, an abundance of fresh water, animals that were easy to hunt. But the official story told is there was a great sick, and people were dropping like flies left and right. So the villagers fled to get away from the sick. However, the island is known for being so very big. Realistically, if you wanted to get away from others, it wouldn't have been too hard, because you could be self-sufficient on other parts of the island. The story told to me growing up is a bit different though. Back in those days, we loved to fight. A war canoe from my island, Rendova, arrived on Tetepare to fight. However, upon arrival, they were met with numerous unburied dead bodies. All the large canoes that belonged to the Tetepare people were gone. To leave so hastily and not even bury your dead was a really weird thing, because it was back in the days where they first thought that spirits had done this to these people. However, the people from Rendova decided to set up villages against their better judgment. In due time, they also fled because the spirits that had decimated the population of Tetepare apparently attacked the newly set up villages there. Ever since, the island has continued to remain uninhabited, except for a few of the eco-lodges that tourists come and visit now and again. Now in present day, we go to Tetepare to maybe have a picnic or go hunting. We are, however, extremely cautious, because it is believed the island is still extremely wild, and because of the lack of humans, spirits run amok on the island. I have some weird stories about going hunting there too, and I think it's time to tell you them. The island is said to be wild because no churches have been built on it yet. For this reason, it is alleged that spirits still roam free. Ever since I was small, we went hunting on Tetepare. They have an issue with wild boars destroying their natural habitat, so hunting is encouraged, and as a result of chasing boars around the island, I have a pretty good knowledge of knowing where things are. A few years ago when I was younger, while we were hunting, we decided to go visit our other relatives at the Eco Lodge. Recommend visiting if you want a unique experience. There was a researcher who wanted to have a look at unique flora and fauna, and since I was the only one who spoke English somewhat fluently, I volunteered to take him. We explored the island quite extensively. The thing is, we know that when we're hunting, we don't go deep into the rainforest, because you may not come out. Simply because of its density, but also because there have been stories of other things. Anyway, I was taking this researcher around and he had a navigational piece of equipment. He was using it to see where we were going. The day was coming to an end, and I wanted to return to the eco-lodge because I didn't want to be camping in the middle of the night without shelter. The way we normally do things is come back out of the rainforest towards the coast, and from there, walk to wherever we need to go, because we don't want to get lost in the rainforest. I knew where we were, and I knew the way to the coast, and told the researcher, let's get going this way. This is where things get weird. His device was saying the coast was the completely different direction from where I knew the direction to the coast was. Now I've heard stories when people go hunting about losing their minds and going straight into the rainforest and never coming back out. At that point I had to question my own brain, because what his device was saying was completely different to what I knew. But I knew in that moment that it may be his device playing up, and I didn't want to take the risk of disappearing into the rainforest because of it. I had walked this forest thousands of times, so decided to trust my gut. I told the researcher I thought his device was incorrect. He did not like the sound of that at all and tried to argue with me, saying that I was wrong. I knew something was wrong, and so I didn't want to spend my time arguing and wanted to get out of their area ASAP. So I basically told him, I'm going the way I know to get to the coast. You can follow your device if you want, but I'm not following you because you're wrong. We may die. Long story short, I followed the direction I knew and lo and behold we made it to the coast. Thing is, if we'd have followed his device, we would have ended up in the densest part of the island where people are known to have gone missing. When we made it back to the eco-lodge, he apologized and checked his device to see if it was broken. But lo and behold, turns out it was working perfectly again. My ex-father-in-law, Pedro, grew up working ranches. He told me this story, and that it happened to him in the 80s. Somewhere down in Frio County, along Highway 57, the road to Eagles Pass, he took a job with a ranch owner. He was given a mobile home to stay, and his family was welcomed to stay also. The ranch owner, Ferguson, I think is what they called him, had built himself a home several miles away on the same property. For the ranch hand, a site-built home was partially started but never completed. It was 3 sides of cinder block and a partial roof. This is why the mobile home was there. The land is about 100 miles from the US-Mexico border, and there have always been a lot of illegal immigrants crossing this land. One late afternoon, there were several illegals crossing the ranch property, when Pedro sees them and yells at them, asking what the hell they're doing crossing. They all stop and say, "Sir, we want no trouble. We're trying to get north for work and we're looking for a place to stay for the night." Pedro says, "Look at that home over there. You can camp there tonight, but need to be gone early because the owner will be up and doing his rounds. It should be enough cover for the night. If he sees you, I'll act like I don't know you." They agreed and set up camp in the non-completed house. So Pedro couldn't sleep well knowing he may be getting in trouble. He woke up extra early to wake the illegals up to tell them they needed to go. But none of them were in the house. He looked around and found that they had all moved their camp about 50 feet from the mobile home. He woke them and asked them why they moved. One of them started to say, "No, sir. We meant no trouble, but no one can stay in that area. We all heard voices screaming for help. It was bad." They left soon after, and nothing was talked about again, until years later. Both Pedro and Ferguson had gotten older. By now they were pretty close, and sat out one night in the ranch drinking beer. Pedro tells him, "You know, one night these illegals came through and asked to stay the night. I told them they could stay in the old house, but they didn't." Pedro told Ferguson the whole story. Ferguson sat there a while. He finally said, "You know, after all these years I never told you. When I was young, I saw my grandfather work this ranch, and a handful of times I saw him catch some illegals himself. He killed them and buried them right there. He starts to build that home right over the bodies, but not even the contractors could finish it. They heard the same thing. So, as skeptical as I am about anything paranormal, with my logic being that just because science can't explain it yet, doesn't mean it's not creepy as hell. But some memories from my childhood are really starting to bother me. It was around 20 years ago. I grew up next to a very creepy 400-acre forested area in the middle of Tennessee, USA. Apparently, it used to belong to a family of freed slaves, way back when, which is now still owned and undeveloped, except for some really old, dilapidated and decomposing structures sporadically scattered across it, from when it was occupied by the original family. My brothers and I used to go hiking in the woods and found these places, but we stopped. Because, well, that part comes later. For some clarity, I mean an old farmhouse, smokehouse, and on the border of the property line in the wooded area behind my old house was a rickety old house. Think Little House on the Prairie or old Amish style, and you get the picture. If you go ahead and age it an extra 150 years. So my old house, which was on kind of an elevation, with the backyard sloping to the wooded property line, bordered said creepy 300-acre wood. The neighborhood I was in was basically bordering the forest along this property line, with the house facing the street, with the backyards bordering the forest line that was demarked by a solid line of underbrush and very mature trees. So the memories and why I'm here. The first memory I have still creeps me out. So mind you, there are no roads, no inhabited houses, nothing built or done to this area because of land division dispute and some will/deed problems with the family who owns the land, and apparently it's been this way for over 150 years. Just forest. My sister and I were out playing in our backyard near the property line, where the creepy-ass, falling-down little prairie-looking house was, when she spotted an old woman in the house. The front of the house was broken down, and you could clearly see into it. It had 2 stories, kind of like a cutaway from a dollhouse where you could take off the front and see all the rooms. Allegedly, this 70 to 80-year-old woman was just sitting in a green lawn chair, watching us from the 2nd-story loft. We were young, maybe 8. We didn't really notice some of the more peculiar aspects of this scene. We'd been playing for a few hours and would have seen someone walk by carrying a green lawn chair, because we had a clear view of the house, and you couldn't really get to it unless you either came from our yard or you hiked through a lot of wood. An elderly woman dragging a lawn chair up a rotted-out ladder to the 2nd story of a rotted-out loft, and just chilling there watching me and my sister. So of course my sister goes and says hi, finds out she speaks, and said she used to live in that house a long time ago. She looked fairly normal for an old person, but the face was indistinct to me, like I couldn't really get a solid look at it for some reason. I got uncomfortable and said bye to the creepy old lady, and left, where I basically grabbed my sister and we returned to the house. Now this bothers me, because no one has lived or been living in this area for nearly 150 years. No one could have, or should have been living there. There were no records of it or anything. Also, I knew for a fact that there is no road nor trail or anything that goes to the old house, even now thanks to Google Earth. So how did this old woman just appear and disappear? Because as we were walking back to the house, I glanced back at the property line about 80 yards back to the old house and the green chair, which was still there. But the old lady was gone. She didn't pass by us, didn't hear her climb down. Nothing. Clear line of sight, early afternoon, not overcast, very well lit. She was simply gone.
I did some research from when I had to steal stuff next door for school and couldn't find a similar person on my street or the next or even in the neighborhood. So to this day I still have no clue what happened there. A second memory. This happened a few times in middle school, but sometimes when I was walking home from the bus stop at the end of the street. The tree line and underbrush along the backyards of the house that bordered the creepy forest started to have glowing red dots in sporadic clusters and resembled to me eyes like tiny orbs of red dull light that appeared along the underbrush and followed me home. I thought it was maybe berries, but no. I hiked through that area with my brothers. No berries or red anything. Ever. Not holly, or seasonal fruiting bushes or animals, because we had some foxes, deer, and squirrels. That's about it. I couldn't explain it, then nor now. I just remember running home whenever I saw the lights in the underbrush, along the tree line, and would hide in my house as fast as I could. The one time I was brave enough to go up to the bushes, the lights disappeared before I even got close. No sound, no wind, nothing but a cold chill. Which at the time was weird, as it was late spring or early autumn in Tennessee when it happened to me. And it stays pretty damn warm usually. I couldn't ever find any evidence as to what it was. No red berries or critters, or some wackadoo raving around red Christmas lights. Yet, this memory still gets to me. My third memory. Why do I feel like I'm being watched? So my old house was old. Well, 30 years or so. Never really got the cold spots or the other classic signs that someone's making up stuff about having a paranormal encounter. But every now and then when I was alone, maybe the basement usually, or occasionally outside in the woods, I got the sensation someone or something else was there. And every time before I felt the sensation, I started to get afraid a little first. Then full on mad dash away in full adrenaline mode whenever I realized what I was feeling. This happened more than I liked. I hated it and thought I was losing my mind. Mind you, I didn't do any drugs, prescribed or otherwise, and even didn't start drinking till college. I couldn't explain it, and it didn't fit panic attack symptoms or anything similar. I've been checked out and looked at, examined my medical records, but couldn't find anything from a biological perspective. There are a few more jarring experiences as well that happened to me, and I'm going to share these with you now. There was another occasion where I was tromping around the woods and felt like I was being forcibly turned around. My brother and I spent a good deal of our first 5 to 7 years at that house going in the forest, hiking around with no problems, usually. Or how we all just stopped when we got close to high school age. And I chalked it up to us having other things to do, girls, sports, friends. Then I remembered arguably our last trip, and my second to last trip into that forest. My last trip made me never go into those woods again. Thinking back, maybe there's a reason why no one wants to develop the woods, or why the owners won't sell to anyone. I even checked. Even if the forest is prime real estate South Nashville worth millions of dollars, probably because we were kids or something. If we felt uncomfortable, we just didn't talk about it and cut trips short, so we ignored things. Except this trip that turned out to be our last group outing into the damn forest, because we were old enough to start knowing when things simply aren't right. Thinking back on those details through meditation and sorting through details with my brother, who didn't want to recall anything, seems like we made a conscientious decision to never speak of it again. Except, I wanted answers. And here's the story. So, usual gorgeous late spring Tennessee weather that begs you to get outside and go for a hike into nature. My brother and I gear up for a Saturday excursion into the woods to explore past the old ruined smokehouse to the left side of the woods. We trek through the back of our property line into the woods proper, trekking a straight line using our compasses, to go to the circular clearing of protruding limestone. As we got closer, it got quiet, almost silent except for us trailblazing. We get to the clearing, and my two brothers in front of me stop and look at the center of the stone clearing, where a raised circle outcropping of rock is about 150 feet. I can't really see much at the time, because I was still 4'0", and behind those behemoths I call family. We didn't even notice some important details at first, like how quiet it was, there being no flies or anything around, or the wax stripping around the center stone circle, making an odd star-shaped pattern, and that it feels like we're being watched, where the back of your neck hair has gone up, and you expect to turn around and see someone. My oldest brother goes up to the circle and just says, "Oh crap." I don't have a word, and my second brother starts to notice some of the weirdness about the outer part of the circle and goes to look. I, being the smallest, am curious, as all get out and go wander over to the middle where my oldest brother has gone a bit pale and is staring at something. I look past my older brother's shoulder and see on the top of the stone dies a lump of stuff. It is a disemboweled animal arranged strangely, but it wasn't eaten at all and appeared to be a fox. I remember thinking it was strange because I couldn't smell it, and there were no flies or anything or signs it had been bitten open, just splayed there with its organs somehow around it, like a dissection. At this time, everyone started to notice everything else I mentioned. When we confirmed it was more than just one of us feeling like that, we started to hear what sounded like the wind through the trees, but nothing was moving. Not the grass, the plants, and the treetops, which we all knew to look at to figure out the wind direction. Then my eldest brother said, "We're going back right now," in a serious tone that I'd never heard him use before. So we all collectively buggered out and went back to the house as fast as we could. I overheard my older brother talking about sacrifice and that we're not going back, and to tell Mom, Dad, and the police. I was 12, so I didn't think much of it and was more concerned with hanging out with my friends later in the day. I couldn't just focus on the memories, or I didn't want to think about it. The last time in those woods for me was this memory. Fast forward 2 to 3 months, and I'm doing a small hike through the woods alone, maybe 400 meters back from the tree line that borders the neighborhood. I wanted to move parallel to the road so I could get back easily by cutting out a right angle and walking back on the street to my house. 10 minutes into this, I start to turn right to go towards the street to get back in time to leave for the beach vacation with my mum and sister. That's when I felt it. The most uncomfortable and awful sensation I've ever felt in those woods. It was like I was being watched coldly, and it was getting closer. I never scared or spooked easily as a kid, and especially in woods. My background is important, as I was basically in various national parks every other weekend camping with my scout troop. I've been through solo orienteering courses day and night in all seasons to earn merit badges, and I don't freak out then, and when I was younger. But this time, I was spooked hard. I turned around and looked everywhere around me. It was very quiet, too quiet for Tennessee woods. If you've ever been to the southeastern US in summer, go anywhere near nature. You'll understand what I mean when I say it's never quiet. I yelled out tentatively, thinking it could be another person. God, I was hoping it was a person. Then it just got silent. And no, not any normal silence, like the kind where you can hear your own breathing. I freak out and bolt out those woods as fast as I can, and ended up getting the worst case of poison ivy in my life, and had to be sedated and put on steroids. I never went back to those woods after that. This happened a few months ago, and has been bugging me.
I was out hiking and rappelling with a friend in the hills near Tombstone. I want to mention that I have spent quite a bit of time solo hiking and camping, and I'm used to hearing noises and just brushing it off. It's late afternoon. I'm the first one to rappel down. I got to the bottom, and while my partner was getting ready to follow, we heard this noise that I would describe like a growl or snarl. It sounded like it was coming from the ridge above both of us. If facing the cliff, it sounded like it was coming from the right side. We both looked around but didn't see anything. I encouraged him to come down and even half joked that it probably was just a bear or a mountain lion. At that point, I wasn't even feeling that nervous. I figured that once the two of us were together again, we would be pretty intimidating to any animal. While he rappelled down, I heard a loud crash to what seemed to be parallel to me on my left. By this point, I'm starting to get pretty scared because it was getting closer and also had somehow gone from right to left on an exposed cliff face without either of us seeing it. He successfully rappelled down, and we both agreed now was the time to get the hell out of there, and we still had a steep downhill climb to the car. We packed up the gear as fast as possible. As we get our backpacks on, we heard what sounded like a howler monkey. The noise was close, but we still were unable to see what exactly it was that was making it. Of course, it was from the direction that we needed to go, and we hauled ass down the mountain and got to the car. I know that it can be easy to let the mind play tricks on you, but we both heard the exact same thing. Now this is the part I get hesitant while talking about because it sounds even more insane, but we both heard whispering and giggling as if it was right next to us. I keep trying to explain to myself that our minds just played a trick. The first noise I could chalk up to a bear or mountain lion. Animals are stealthy and could run in front of us without us noticing. Something else could have fallen from the right side. What made the monkey noise though? And why do we both feel like we heard whispering? Anyone else have any creepy experiences in Arizona? I want to believe someone was pranking us, but there weren't any other cars in the parking area. My friend believes that we experienced something supernatural. I personally have no idea what to think. When I was traveling to Oz, I was staying with a good friend. I was there for about a month, and I had access to his car and was out of town on my own for a few days. My plan was to meander from Melly to Wilson's Prom, and I decided to take a detour up to Nuji State Park. I had noticed in my guidebook there was a trestle bridge not far from where I was going to set up camp and wanted to see it. Not sure why. Thought perhaps it would look cool for photos maybe. The thing about Oz is once you're off the main highway, things are often not clearly marked. I drove past the old aged sign and had to pull a U-turn to hit the bridge. I'm not sure what the purpose of this bridge is. It used to be a rail bridge, and now it appears to be a short 3-kilometer hike from Nuji. Other than that, there were no houses nearby it, and it's not a loop route, the only way in or out. I get to the parking area and there's no one there, and I mean no one. It's late in the day, the sun is getting ready to dip beyond the horizon, and I am pumped because I have solitude. I walked up the stairs to the bridge and start walking along it taking pics. When I notice there is nothing about, no birds, no bugs. What the hell is this, Oz? I ponder for a moment, continue taking pics and look up, when I see a woman standing in front of me. At first I thought I was imagining her, and then she spoke. She seemed very kind and asked where I was from and if I was enjoying my trip. I was a bit taken aback, as I didn't hear anyone approach, and she definitely wasn't prepared for a 6-kilometer walk dressed in shoes and a blouse. And from what I could see, and later confirmed in the guide, there aren't any houses nearby. We chatted for a good 10 minutes and then said our goodbyes. I turned to take a pic, turned back, and she was gone. I didn't hear her leave. She was not strolling off in the distance, she was just gone. As soon as that registered with me, the sound of the birds and bugs came back instantly. I can't explain it, and I never felt that scared or threatened. It was just a very strange and surreal moment. This happened in March of 2011 near my house, in a small town about an hour north of Indianapolis, Indiana. I was in 8th grade at the time, and it was during my spring break. That year, instead of sunshine and warm weather for spring break, there was a snowstorm, probably around 8 inches or so of snow. My 2 friends, my 2 younger brothers and I decided to make the best of it, and just go play in the snow for the day. There was a woods near my house, not a huge woods, but big enough to hike around for a few hours, so we decided to do just that. About an hour into the hike, we stumbled on what looked like an old well, a stone circle, about 10 feet in diameter, and about 4 feet high off the ground, and partially filled in with foul-smelling, half-frozen water. We threw in a few rocks and stuck long tree branches into it to try and find out how deep it was. We tried with a branch that was at least 20 feet long, but we were never able to hit the bottom, so it was pretty deep down. Now the well by itself wasn't really creepy or anything, but how old it looked, and the way it was just sticking out in the middle of the woods was a little unnerving. The part that really terrified us came about 20 minutes after discovering the well. We had decided that we were done messing around with the well, and had just started to continue on to the woods, when we all heard something that made us freeze dead in our tracks with fear. Echoing through the woods came a loud, shrieking laugh. It was a high-pitched, grating voice that was still very loud, despite seeming like it came from somewhere far away. We all just froze for a moment, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. The laugh came again, this time distinctly closer to us, but still not in our immediate vicinity. At that moment, none of us was saying a word. We bolted back the way we came, away from the sound in the direction of my house. We didn't stop running for what seemed like forever, and we eventually made it back to my house without any more incidents. None of us had a clue as to what we'd just heard, and none of us were ever brave enough to go back there and try to figure it out. I would love to hear any thoughts about what it could have been, paranormal or otherwise. This happened when I was around 8 years old. I grew up in the Midwest, Ohio to be more specific. The town or village was not large by any means, with around 40 to 50 people at most. During this time, my family didn't have the internet or cable TV, and cell phones were just starting to become mainstream. And as such, entertainment was mostly chores or roaming the surrounding area exploring. My house was backed by fairly dense woods. There was a steep decline with a massive, relatively flat wooded area where a creek ran through. This creek wasn't very deep. Waist deep in certain areas, but mostly knee or ankle deep, but it was wide. Growing up, I lived in these woods, hiking up and down the creek, mapping the woods, exploring a few long abandoned and collapsed houses that nature reclaimed. I lived and breathed nature, and those woods were my home away from home. My father grew up in that area. My aunt, uncle, and cousins lived just next door to it. It was a pretty close-knit community. Naturally, everyone has ghost stories about their hometown, a haunted house, a tragedy of some sort that remains a stain on its history. My village was no different. My father would always tell stories about ghosts or abnormal happenings he experienced in his youth. One thing he would always tell me, when I told him that I was going into the woods was, the trees may not walk about or talk, but they see, and they remember. I always thought of that as him saying, don't be stupid out there. My first encounter with people of the woods, which is what I've always called them, was when I was out on one of my daily excursions into the wild green. It was mid-July, hot and humid, and I stuck mostly to the creek as it was cool, and I didn't have to battle my way through thick undergrowth. I hiked approximately about 2 miles along the creek, hunting for crawdads or crawfish, and looking for signs of deer, rabbit, or the fabled albino squirrel. I kept traveling and eventually reached a relatively open field that had waist-high grass. I frequently stopped here to gather wild blackberries, rest, and spook the few white-tailed deer that bobbed in the area. But that day was different. As I drew closer to the field, I noticed someone standing there. Instinctively, I slowed down, lowered my posture, and tried to minimize my noise. I wasn't used to seeing someone out this far into the woods. The nearest house to that location was about 1.5 miles through thick undergrowth and fairly steep ravines to climb. As I hugged the bank of the creek, I moved to the edge of the open field, slowly peeking up over the tall grass to see if they were still there. But there was nothing. I thought that perhaps they had seen or heard me trudging through the creek and instinctively ducked too. I wasn't about to find out, so I turned around and headed back home, all 2.5 miles back. I was more aware of my surroundings and far more cautious of my sound as I moved, avoiding walking in the creek to prevent the sloshing of water to give me away. As I crept through the branches jutting out into the bank of the creek, I made my way to another area I was familiar with. A small game trail ran through here, and it would cut my time and distance back home a good bit. The only downside was it was pretty overgrown to either side, and portions had thick thorn bushes. The entire time I trekked back, I felt as if I was being watched. I never felt in danger or vulnerable of being attacked, but I could feel eyes on me. I was uneasy the entire time I followed the game trail, routinely stopping and listening to determine if I could hear footsteps or if I was being followed. Still nothing. I made it about halfway home when I saw in the corner of my eye a figure standing a short distance away. But as I moved my eyes in the direction of the figure, they seemed to just melt into the foliage. I thought maybe it was my paranoia, and it was making me see things, so I just carried on. A few 100 feet more, I again see another figure, this time further away out of my peripheral, and again as I looked in that direction, they'd meld back into the background. But this time it happened twice. As I looked, and the figure disappeared, another appeared again in my peripheral, closer but still a ways away. The entire time I never felt to be in danger. Creeped out, yes, but I never felt like whatever was there was nefarious. This continued on for the remainder of my time making my way back home. But the more it happened, the less I felt afraid of the figure, even going as far as saying out loud, "I know you're there. I don't know what you want, but I'm not here to cause trouble." Eventually I made it to my backyard and turned around to face the woods to see if they were there. But I saw nothing. My father was next to his shed, burning some cut grass in the backyard. I walked over to tell him what I had experienced, and before I could say a word, he looked at me with a slight grin and said, "I see you saw them too." I guess I had the look of terror written on my face. Without even missing a beat, he put down the hoe he was using to stoke the fire, walked past me to the wood line, and pulled out the can of dip he had from his pocket. He opened it, took a pinch out and placed it on a stone that was just sitting there, and then walked out. I asked him why he did that, and he said he gave them an offering. He began explaining what he meant by the trees see and remember, that it was important that we respect nature whenever we enter her domain, and give an offering in return when we take something from her. Otherwise, she may just not let us back out. He gave me the can of dip, and said what I saw were what he believed to be the spirits of Native Americans watching over their former land. I didn't really know what they were at the time, but I followed suit with what my dad did whenever I made my way back into the woods. I always left an offering. Although I still did see them from time to time, I never felt like I was in danger, and I always made sure to respect them. If they appeared in my peripherals, I would travel in the opposite direction. Apologies for any transgressions. The cousins and many people in my village were all aware of their existence, and just kind of gave them a wide berth whenever they appeared. I was oblivious to their existence, but when I learned of them and experienced them, a whole lot of people opened up about them, about some of the history of the town. was certainly an enlightening experience.
Last year, from January to July, I dated a guy called Lucas. He loved the paranormal more than I did. He's also a firm believer, while I tend to be more skeptical. I firmly believe in angels and demons, but I'm kind of iffy on the topic of ghosts due to my more religious upbringing, whereas he comes from a small town steeped in superstition, where I came from a big city, where we had so much going on to even consider the afterlife. We met during my freshman year of college. He attended the community college and I attended the major university. My roommate and I got bored one night and had downloaded Tinder more as a joke than anything else. Nevertheless, I matched with Lucas and he was eager to meet and could hold a conversation, and I decided, why not? We met at the local barbecue place right off my campus and spoke for hours. Towards the end, he asked me, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I felt like this could be a trap. What if I say yes and he thinks I'm crazy? I told him I wasn't really sure but was open to the notion. He told me he could turn me into a believer. I was like, bet. And we decided one day he'd take me to the local ghost tour. He was a native of my small college town. He knew every superstition, every back road, and he knew stories only locals knew. The stuff you can't really find online. We kind of fell off when I went home that summer. We had something happen to us a week prior to the semester ending. We almost died and kind of wanted to be alone to process it. That's a story for another time. Fast forward to November of my sophomore year. He randomly sent me a friend request on Facebook, and I accepted and we started chatting via the messenger. We get back on the topic of the paranormal and I asked, "Hey, do you remember the night we almost died?" He replied that he does. I told him I wanted to go back to the spot, a cemetery, where we had something freaky happen. We were actually on a ghost hunt then, and I was super casual about it all, as I was 100% convinced nothing would happen. "Hell no, I didn't want to go back there, I almost died," he said. "But I can show you the bridge. It's haunted," he goes. He picks me up from my old dorm, and we set out for the bridge. It took us about 20 minutes to get there. It was up in the mountains, and there weren't any streetlights of any kind. The bridge stretched over this creek, and there are woods all around the bridge. Middle of nowhere, literally. We exit his truck with flashlights and go to stand on the bridge. I ask him to tell me the story as to why it's haunted. He goes on to tell me that back in the 1960s, there lived a doctor called Dr. Gary. He was a rural mountain doctor and would take house calls. He was heading home one night. It was later than usual. He was exhausted and overworked and came down the mountain flying towards the bridge. As he was about to cross it, he had a heart attack and lost control of his small car. His car swerved across the bridge, hitting the side 3 times before flipping over into the creek below. Obviously, he passed away. It is said that every night Dr. Gary relives his death and drives across the bridge every night before splashing into the creek. You'll hear a loud bam as his car hits the side, and then twice more before a splash. Before that, you'll see his 1960s car coming around the bend. Lucas has a large group of guy friends, and several of them aren't believers. He took them to the bridge to wait for Dr. Gary, and they're all standing under the bridge when they heard the bam, bam, bam. It scared them so much, they refused to go back. I was living for this, and was so pumped to witness this. We got there at 11, and according to Lucas's dad, that's when Dr. Gary comes. Lucas was steadfast it would happen. I yelled, "Hey, Dr. Gary, I don't believe you exist. Show yourself." We waited for over an hour and nothing happened. Lucas was dumbfounded. We left and decided to try again the next night. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th night, we decided to go earlier. I had a test the next day and didn't want to be out late. We arrived at 9 p.m. Lucas asked me if I wanted to see the creek below the bridge. There are these stone steps you can go down and explore underneath. I was apprehensive and feared homeless people slumbering below or creeps waiting for easy targets to wander into their den. But still we headed down the steps when I heard people talking. They sounded young, maybe my age. I was 20 at the time, and figured we shouldn't go down there, but Lucas looked at me like I was crazy. He couldn't hear the people talking. It was so loud. There were at least 4 of them, and he shined his light below and shook his head. "Megan, there's no one down there," he said. He left me and went down the stairs, and I didn't want to be alone, so followed him. He was right. There was no one down there, but I knew I heard people clear as day. They were laughing. I could even tell some were male and others female. I was beyond confused. He was explaining to me how he and his friends liked to drink beer underneath the bridge when we heard a car coming. Because we were in an isolated place, we didn't hear cars pass by much. You'd only have about 1 or 2 an hour. I was like, oh, a car's driving above us. When all of a sudden we heard the bam, 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 followed by a splash. It was so intense the whole bridge was vibrating, and I'm like, crap! We sprint up the stairs and get in his truck. I honestly have no clue what would cause that. We didn't bail out and stuck around and ghost hunted. I had an EVP recorder and ghost detector device and got them out to see if I could speak with Dr. Gary. What happened with that I'll share for another time. I'd love to hear what you all have to say. I am now firmly a believer in him. After the bridge thing, the activity ramped up big time. All the nights before that were calm. Not this one.
My name is Lindsay, and I'm a 19-year-old female living in Pennsylvania with my parents and my 2 sisters. We live in a pretty rural area, and there isn't much that goes on out there. To preface this, me and my older sisters have only been hiking 1 time before this experience, and are by no means pros. We do, however, always bring some items such as pocket knives, flashlights, and medical kits for safety. My older sister is called Mary, and it so happened that today was my younger sister Felicity's birthday. She had never been hiking before, and we figured we would bring her on a little hiking trip to take advantage of the beautiful weather. The area we hiked prior to this is part of the state game lands. Hikers are permitted on the mountain trails during the off-season of hunting. However, not many folks know about this spot because there are no signs or anything until you walk the mile or so into the woods. By then you reach a small parking lot of sorts which is always empty. There are 2 main trails that are marked with the occasional blue dot on a nearby tree. We were decently excited and ready to have a nice relaxing hike through the mountains and hopefully get some cool pictures. We started walking from our house all the way to the bottom of the mountain, where we would begin our hike. On our way there, we were telling Felicity about the trail and how beautiful it was. Mary then expresses concerns that there could be animals of all sorts nearby because the area isn't normally frequented by many humans. I figured there would be animals, of course. It is the woods after all, but I never imagined anything like what I'm about to describe. After wandering for about 15 minutes, we reached the parking lot. Mary led the way with me into the middle, and Felicity followed closely behind. The first couple of steps onto the trail require you to walk up a small but steep hill. Mary crested the hill before Felicity and I, and as she did, we heard a pretty loud rustling noise off to our left. I naturally chalked the noise up to some birds or maybe a squirrel messing around in a tree, but then Mary suddenly stopped in her tracks, causing Felicity to also briefly pause. Just as I was about to ask what the problem was, Mary calmly told us to turn around. Felicity and I looked at her in confusion, not understanding what she meant. I just started asking why, and she said probably the scariest thing I've ever heard. "There's something over there. Run." Now, that sentence might not be that scary to you, but it was a lot more scary to me, given the context and situation I was in. And we know Mary very well, and she doesn't scare easily. so to hear the clear panic in her voice as she ordered us to run away from something that neither Felicity or I saw was quite terrifying. Mary and Felicity immediately began sprinting down the small hill as I was standing in my place. I quickly looked behind me but saw nothing. I did hear something though. I was still very confused because I hadn't actually seen anything, and Mary never said what she saw. I ran over to Mary and Felicity, who were waiting for me just before the entrance to the parking lot. I think part of the reason I hesitated running right away was because I thought Mary might be exaggerating a little. I should have known by the look on her face that she wasn't messing around. I had a miniature hatchet, multi-tool, and a pocket knife on my belt, and you better believe I had them ready. I had no idea what I was expecting, but I knew that whatever might run out of the woods behind us was going to get a face full of stainless steel. When I reached my sisters, I asked Mary what exactly we were running from. She told us to just keep moving, and she constantly looked back at the trail we had just come from. And she told us to just jog in case it was following us. We did, after maybe jogging a quarter mile or so. That was when Mary finally told us what we were running from. She said she looked in the direction of the noise we had all heard, and that what she saw was a grey figure hunched over about 10 feet off the trail. She described it as being at least the height of Felicity, who was 5'6". She said it looked bipedal, but she didn't stick around long enough to take in every detail about the figure. However, she did note that it looked as if it was shuffling towards us. I believe that's what made her get out of there so fast. She must have feared that we were being chased. Now, I've never believed in monsters or cryptids or anything, but Mary said she honestly has no idea what the thing was. We don't even have that type of animal in Pennsylvania that matches the description, at least not as far as I'm aware. I know that black bears stand on their hind legs sometimes, but they are not grey, and it did not sound big enough to be a bear. The only other thing it may have been is a human. But why would someone hear us obviously distressed and not call out and let us know they were there and not a threat? Unless the person was not a friendly hiker. Possibly a person living on the mountain, maybe someone on drugs afraid to be busted. I don't know. That seems to be the only logical explanations for me. But I'm still not fully convinced it was a person. I don't believe in Bigfoot per se, but who knows? By the time we were almost home, Mary told us she used to go to the bus stop with 2 of the neighborhood kids. She said they would always talk about a mystery animal that they would see walking around the woods near their house, which was very close to the state game lands. At first she didn't believe in them because she had never seen such a thing. But one time with the neighbor's kid's grandmother, Mary asked about this mystery animal. The grandmother had always been a very religious person and didn't seem to be the type of person to believe in something like her grandkids explained. But to Mary's surprise, the grandmother said she had also witnessed the mystery animal lurking around. What's more, our house is just across the lawn from where our neighbors claimed this spot was. I'm not sure if these 2 experiences are related. Besides, that was years ago. But could the figure Mary encountered in the woods tonight be the mystery animal? Maybe it was a human or an animal, but who knows for sure. What I do know is I don't think I will be hiking on the state game lands anytime soon again. I used to have a delivery route on the 3rd shift. Part of my route had me passing through a national forest. The first few weeks going through this forest had the hairs on my arms standing up. It was in the first week that one day I stopped to get gas at the town just before going into the forest. I never walked away from the car, and I used my card at the pump. But as soon as I got to the forest, I felt like something was in the car with me, in the back seat. I didn't see anything through the rear view, and I was petrified of turning around, but I knew what it looked like at the same time. To sum it up, an old lady with a face similar to a scream mask with long, stringy grey hair. After a few weeks, I came to peace with whatever the hell was guarding the forest. Basically, I told it that I respected the forest, and I'm not there to tear things up and litter. Months later, I'm being sent off to other areas to fill in. I'm friends with the guy that took over my route, and one night we're both talking before the routes were set, and I asked him if he had ever had anyone join him on the route. He knew exactly what I was talking about, knew that it was the national forest and that something in the back seat had joined him. Only for him it was a jackal-headed creature, not an old lady. Later, I asked someone else that used to have the route if they had seen strange things in the forest. It got to become amusing, since if I filled in on that route or anything, I never had any problems anymore on that stretch. I used to see other weird things out there though, mostly strange lights. One night, I thought there was a police car somewhere, until I realized the forest was too dense in the area for a car to be in. There were just these weird flashing blue lights. There's camping areas out there, but not near the main road. I don't usually discuss this much because people try to explain things away. But they weren't there, and I saw what I saw. This happened to me, my brother, and our friends. Not a my sister's uncle's best friend story. This is personal and 100% the truth. Make no assumptions. Here are the facts. You make up your own mind as to what happened. I grew up in a small mountain town in Utah, away from civilization up a canyon. If you walk out my back door and through a 200-yard field, you will come upon a river and a small wooded area. We always called these the river bottoms, for obvious reasons. Summer of 2004, just before I turned 16. Our house was the go-to party location, always clean parties, and lots of people would show up. And most nights we would end up having a bonfire in the backyard with guitars and just chilling and watching the fire and the stars. Well, one night, we started telling ghost stories. One of my close friends lived a mile down the road with his house, some distance away from the same river bottoms. Discussion turns from the fake ghost stories to real talk about weird things that have happened to us, and my friend quickly takes the attention. He tells two stories. The first was when he was younger, 10 or so. He wakes up in the middle of the night in the dead of winter and decides to go downstairs for a glass of water. His kitchen sink faces the river bottoms. While drinking, he looks up at the window and sees a man's face looking at him from outside. He drops the glass. It shatters on the floor, and his mum comes in to see what happened. They turn on the porch light and look outside, where there had been fresh snow. And there was no man or any footprints. Okay, must have been a reflection, sure. A few weeks later, he's outside playing in the snow just after dark, and his dog starts barking and growling towards the river bottoms. He looks out, can't see anything, but gets a weird feeling in his stomach and starts to go inside. He's about to go to the back door when he hears his dog behind him yelp. Then he comes running towards him. Again, turns around and can't see anything and runs inside. He finishes the story saying that he has always had this fear of the river bottoms and doesn't like going out there. Naturally, as a bunch of young men with something to prove, a few of my friends decide they are going to go out to explore. It's nearly a full moon and a clear night, so visibility is pretty good. I think 5 made this trip. They leave about 15 or so of us just chilling around the fire for 10 minutes. Definitely not long enough to really get to the bottoms and explore anything, and they come running back to the fire. A few of them say they saw something out there, which isn't too out of the ordinary. The fields between my backyard and the bottoms frequently have cows, and it's common to see deer, coyotes, as well as other wildlife in the area. We talk them down and resume the guitars. One of my older brother's friends is sitting with his back facing the bottoms and has been unusually quiet since he got back, and keeps turning his head to look behind him. Standing at 6'5" and weighing 240 pounds plus, it was very out of character, and eventually, a second group decides to go out. This time we go inside and gather up flashlights, hockey sticks, baseball bats, whatever we can find just in case. This time we have a group of about 10, which includes myself, and we get about halfway to the river bottoms when I started to get a really dark feeling. I related to fear, but it was so much more, just like something wasn't right. The only time I've had fear like this was when I had a gun pointed at me a few years ago and had genuine fear of my life. Then we start to hear this faint whistle, almost like you would hear with the wind in a wooded area, but we weren't in the trees yet. Then we heard it again in a different direction, then directly behind us, much faster than a person could have moved without being heard or seen. We get freaked out and clump together. We hear the whistle again, and the two with flashlights both zero in on the spot to our left, and what we see just for a fraction of a second is a dark silhouette, maybe 3 to 4 feet high, and red reflection in the eyes. Then it darts away at insane speed, and we lose it. Knowing that everyone saw this thing, we all make a mad dash for the house. Getting back to the fire, we decided we didn't want to stay there any longer. We put out the fire in typical youth fashion. All the boys stood in a circle and peeing on it until the coals were gone, and climbed in the cars and left. About an hour or so later, my brother and I get home, and as we're pulling into the driveway, we see the fire in a blaze again. Still feeling creeped out, we go to put it out with the hose, and all of the wood that we had in the stacks a few feet away had been thrown into the pit. Very weird. The next day, we're having Sunday dinner with my parents. Quick side story. My dad grew up in the 50s in a neighboring house where we currently live. They ask if we had fun last night, and my brother says, "Yeah, but I don't know if anyone will be coming back anymore." "Why is that? Did you guys see the bogeyman?" "Yeah, Dad, we saw the bogeyman," chuckled my brother sarcastically. "Really? I saw the bogeyman once. I was really little, probably 8 or 9. I remember I was really sick and had a fever. I remember looking out my front door one night, around dusk, and seeing this dark shape next to our mailbox. Its head was just below the mailbox, and it was looking at me with glowing red eyes." It was at that point that my brother and I both looked at each other. Did you tell him what happened? We both knew he had been telling the truth. A few weeks later, we again are having a bonfire at the house, when we notice that the river bottoms seem to be glowing a little ways away. We hop in the car and get almost to my friend's house when we see that the bottoms are on fire. We call 911 to report it. It is government land, and decide to go out and see it for ourselves while waiting for the fire department to arrive. It wasn't super out of control, and as we get there, we see that it's just the grass burning in a small clearing. We decide that we could probably even stamp it out. It just looks like a few lines burning in about a 10-foot radius. We get out, and one of my friends starts walking in a circle, following the burnt ash, and looks towards the middle. He then starts to climb a tree, and as he gets a few feet up, he says, "Guys, this is a pentagram." The weird thing is that it had been burning for at least half hour before we got there, but the grass was still burned into a perfect pentagram. No spreading at all. Super weird. A few days later, we hear about how there are people arrested a few years ago for performing devil worship in the river bottoms. They would regularly burn pentagrams into the ground and slaughter animals in the center. So over the next year, this story spreads through the town and it becomes this sort of legend. My brother has this mythology class in the spring, and the final project was to create a myth. The teacher, knowing this story, suggests to my brother that he uses this as his story and gives it some depth. Greek mythology integrated with real life. My brother give life to the name of Nephus Gowan, or Go for short,
a story about a mortal cursed by Zeus for an affair with Hera, doomed to be a river demon for the rest of time. But the background story is not enough. He decided he needed evidence. We decided to start the night off the same way we did the first night. On fire with about 15 to 20 people, guitars, ghost stories, then gal stories. We called this the ritual, and it seemed to invite whatever it was. After a few hours, we decided it was time. We head towards the bottoms with a video camera in night mode and spotlights. Everyone has their own flashlight, BB guns, you name it. We get about halfway out and the dark feeling comes upon us. Again, I really have to stop and stress this feeling. Fear like you know something wants you dead. This time we don't hear the whistling, but we do hear a rush of something moving quickly and very close. We can't manage to get it in the lights or on the camera, so we decide that we have to keep going. We are still about 20 meters from the bottoms, and there is a small hill ridge that separates the fields from the river. The front person stops moving and asks for the spotlight. He shines it up on this ridge, and standing next to a tree is the black shape with glowing red eyes, 4 feet tall, looking like a child wearing a hooded trench coat but so black that it seems to be made from a black hole. It stays there and stares right back at us. It felt like it was there forever, all of us staring. "Does everyone see that?" with the cameraman saying, "Focus, damn it." And it slowly takes 2 steps towards the tree and disappears behind it, and does not come out from the other side. Screw the project, screw everyone else. Panic sets in and everyone starts running towards the house. We get to the backyard where we have to cross a barbed wire fence. Our house does have a lot of outdoor lighting, so we figure once we cross the fence we'll be safe. The cameraman is on the field side, still pointed towards the bottoms when he realizes he's the last one on that side of the fence. Quick panic, and he turns to hop over. We all get inside, and after trying to calm down, we decide we need to see the footage. We watch everything, trying to see if we caught anything weird on the early part. Nothing. We get to the ridge and the camera just did not want to focus. It faces the ridge, super blurry. He pulls it down, looks at feet, and it would focus back up and blur again. You could hear, "It's going behind the tree," and then bam, focus as clear as day. Obviously extremely disappointed, everyone starts up their own conversations. My brother starts the tape over again from the beginning and sits right below the TV staring at it, no talking. He is pausing and rewinding frame by frame at the blurry part, trying to find something, but none of the footage seems usable. He gets to the part where we are almost back at the house and my friend, the one from the beginning stories, just happens to be watching, and at the end says, "Hold on, go back." They go real slow frame by frame again, as the cameraman hops the fence. As he hops, the camera faces slightly into the yard to the left, and standing next to a tree not 5 feet away is a small black figure with red glowing eyes. In the yard 5 feet away from him, less than 10 away from most of the rest of us. None of us saw it, or knew it was there, but we had it on camera. So back in those days we had these things called VHS tapes. You put movies on them, and my brother and his friend edited the movie and made 2 copies, one for us and one to turn into his teacher for the project. These tapes both included the footage we shot that night, as well as most of the story we have told here. A few years later, my brother and I decided we wanted to watch it, but couldn't find the tape anywhere. We searched the whole house, nothing. We did not want to fail, so we called up his mythology teacher who we knew had this tape, and had even shown it to his class and asked if we could borrow it to copy it. And of course, he also seemed to have misplaced his copy. To this day, I still don't go to the river bottoms. I don't like to bring up the story when people or family members ask me to tell it, because I know they'll think I'm either lying or that it was just youthful fear playing tricks on my mind. I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. It was real. And though I don't know what it was, something decided to come and torment me and my friends in our teenage years. And I'm 100% confident in saying that it wanted to see us dead.
I'm a teenager, and I've been in scouting/Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more, as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick, suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older, and Amy was only a year older than myself. We had been deliberately walking in the same direction as to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went, in order for us to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around and returned to the campsite. That's when the initial panic set in. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked exactly the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from each other appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the right direction, while shouting for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road but very thin, separating the forest and splitting it in two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. Eventually, we came to a road we didn't recognize, and a woman wearing pink and purple walked past us as we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never heard of the campsite, but there is one in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually returned to our campsite. We frantically apologized for taking so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and stated confusedly that we'd only been gone about 25 minutes, and that our free time was still going on. To this day, it baffles all of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long, and our watches and phone had said we'd been gone for several hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we had entered an area that the concept of time did not apply to. I believe in the paranormal, but this was unlike anything I'd ever heard or experienced before. And the hours in the forest were only minutes in the real world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of camp. It's a weird but true tale, and I only wish I had an explanation.
Me and my friend Jacob go out biking in a forest near my house because it's pretty big and has some nice trails. We'd been biking around an hour when we realized we were kind of lost, so we stopped to try and figure out where we were at. He was trying the map app on his phone when I noticed a house not too far off the trail. My friend's phone wasn't having any luck with connecting, so we decided to walk over to the house to check if someone could point us back in the right area. We knocked on the door, and like a horror movie, the door creaked open. We walked in to ask if anyone was there, and realized the place was empty. It was mostly furbished, but it looked pretty old, and the fridge was rancid. My friend finds a staircase leading up a floor, and we decide to go up and check that part of the place out. The second I put my foot on the staircase, I felt nauseous. I almost fell over because of how bad it felt. My friend helps me walk out the place, but I collapsed outside on the ground and began vomiting. My friend is trying to help me from falling into my vomit, and once I was done, I sat back and tried to get air. That's when my friend turned around and mumbled, "Holy crap, dude." I turn around. The entire house is gone. Like, not even there was dirt and stuff that proved the house was there. I mean, it looked like the house had never been there in the first place. There was even a tree growing in a spot where the corner of the place was. I didn't really know what to say, so I just sat there, staring at the ground. That's when I realized I had taken a picture of the place on my phone. So I pulled it out, trying to see if I had actually taken a picture or not. It was just a picture of the ground covered in dead leaves and grass. We decided that moving was better than staying there, and after half an hour we found our way back to the trail we knew. I've got no idea what the hell that was. Has anyone else seen this? I can't be the only one, right?
A few years ago, I was down on my luck in life, and through a series of circumstances ended up living in the woods on some state land as a last resort. Given my vantage point, I could easily hear cars approaching this stop from a mile away, and there weren't more than a few houses within walking distance, so I usually knew when there were people around me. Interestingly enough, there was a nearby spot where I found an old cobblestone foundation about 50 yards from my camp, and every night I saw what looked like an oil lantern where a match would strike even in the wind, and the lantern would light. The match would then go out, and the lantern would bob forward for about 15 steps, and the light would disappear. I went to see if there was anyone there, first by going to see the lot if there were any cars, and I tried walking out into the woods after it, and it just kept blowing out and relighting a little further away each time. As you can imagine, I turned around pretty quickly, but I was certain enough that there was no one out there blowing out and relighting a little further away. When that happened, I turned around pretty quickly, but was certain there was still no one there. I'm not all about ghosts and stuff, but I have no logical explanation for what it was that I witnessed that night. A few years back, a few friends and I decided to go up a hiking trail to drink and have a laugh. This happened around Halloween. It was around 2015. The place we went to was Murphy's Ranch Park in Whittier, California. It's in a suburb in the foothills of the city if anyone is familiar with the place, and they'll know exactly where I mean. At the entrance of the park is a benched and wooded area that leads to multiple hiking trails that we were sitting at around 50 to 100 feet from the mouth of the park that leads into a residential street. While sitting around, we heard an owl hooting about, but it didn't sound right to us, almost like a human imitating an owl. As we were talking and drinking, we started even joking about it, and it seemed to get louder and closer. After about 5 minutes, from almost nowhere, a man started walking through the park between the benches. He was around 5'10", dressed in all black with a cloak. Now the part that was weird to us is that while he walked, there was no stride or bounce in his step. His shoulders and body almost seemed stationary, and as if he were a few inches off the ground. His feet did not strike the dirt at all from what I saw. While he was walking through, the owl sounds were much louder than before and a lot closer. It felt as if it were almost right behind us, daring us to look. When we decided to make a run for it, it seemed as if time stopped, and there was no sound, no light, no nothing. And the man turned to us and looked at us, as if he were looking into our eyes individually but at the same time. He was as pale as a sheet, and had yellowish blue eyes that were piercing and almost glowing. As dark as it was, you can see them, but no other features besides his bald head. After what felt like forever, but was only a few seconds, he turned his head and walked, or glided rather, straight towards into the trails. The owl noise was back, and it seemed as though he was following it, and within a second of walking he was nowhere in sight. In that exact moment, we all sprinted to our cars and took off immediately. None of us have ever been back since, knowing the history of what goes on in these hills. I really can't say if the person in question was even human. A friend of ours tried to talk to him, to ask him what he was up to, and he just ignored the call and was gone. Anyone have any idea what I may have witnessed, or even been around? To set the scene, me and my buddy were driving along on a weekend, at night, with some girls we picked up. My buddy is driving, I'm in the passenger seat, and the girls are in the back. We were bored as hell, and somehow the topic of scary stuff popped up. Where we live, there is a certain road tucked away in the back of the woods that follows close to some train tracks. It's extremely dark and infamous for a plethora of spooky stuff. Mostly stories about ghosts, but also stories of people being raped, beaten, and murdered back on that road. So me and my buddy, being the brave, manly men we are, proposed we go there, and they agreed. So we arrived at the beginning of the road and slowly made our way through the dark and foggy road in the dead of night. We drove about 15 minutes until we reached the end of the road, which led to the start of a more populated road. We weren't impressed, so decided to go back through it, but this time do something a little different. So we circled back, driving through the road again, but about halfway through my buddy decided to turn the car off and the lights. We sat in silence for 10 minutes, hearing distant melodic sounds that seemed to be coming from all directions. The fog was thick, but we could still make out at least 15 feet in front of us. Me and my buddy are grinning ear to ear, because the girls are getting super antsy and scared, until we hear a boom. All the windows fog up immediately. We couldn't see anything anymore, like condensation on the glass. The girls start screaming, and me and my buddy were like, "Alright, let's get the hell out of here." He turns the car on and peels out, trying to make his way through the fog and smoked windows. Eventually we get to the end, but this time the exit was blocked by a fallen tree, which scared us at the time, but didn't think much of it. We turned around and got out of there. Fast forward 5 years, and one of my co-workers was talking about the road. He ends up saying how one of his buddies, him and all of their girlfriends, were there four-wheeling. His buddy ended up going off alone into a wooded area only to return later without the quad and running for his life screaming Bloody Mary. They took no time to find out the situation and hauled ass to get out of there, only to find out the exit was blocked by a fallen tree. He looked it up. Turns out someone was killed back there after being trapped in by trees blocking the road. I never took the time to verify what he looked up. Maybe because I'm scared of what might have happened and if it were true, or maybe I don't want to find out it wasn't. And my buddy pulled a fast one on me. But I still won't forget my own experiences there. The road is particularly infamous, popular for ghost stories, and one infamous story is told that an albino lives somewhere off the road with glowing eyes and all. I've heard it's a cannibal, and he's friendly until he invites you out to his home for homemade moonshine. Either way, you probably don't want to find out. P.S. After some research, I've discovered that it takes place on Constitution Drive in Pennsylvania. There's a video I've seen where a woman claims to have caught the most famous ghost story Constitution has to offer, the man and his dog. The legend has it that the man was walking his dog one day when he was struck by a train, severing one leg, leaving him fatally wounded and eventually bleeding out. There are claims that people see this man pacing up and down Constitution walking his dogs, whose eyes glow red. Constitution is a really, really weird place to be at night. Tons of stories, strange, demented and scary things are always told about that place. When you go there at night, you can hear strange noises, almost as if someone is whistling a tune to you. I don't really believe in the paranormal, but it still fascinates me. I keep an open mind even if my default is apprehension or disbelief, because I like the idea that extraordinary things can happen to people. It's interesting if that makes sense. However, there is one scenario that happened to me that I still cannot explain to this day. This happened some years ago. I went to visit a friend some 4 to 5 hours away. I was about 21 or 22. This was my first time traveling to visit friends at the distance. I'd never even taken a train before. My friend used to live in my city, but his family moved when we were younger, still kept in touch. He'd visit sometimes, and this was the first time I'd visit him. His family lives in a much smaller town, and it was also fairly rural. Behind his house was an area of untamed wilderness. I'll call it a forest for clarity, even if it probably didn't classify as one. Just lots of trees and brush, left unmaintained, and to nature. It was their house. Then 30 to 40 feet of chicken wire fence, and a further 250 to 300 feet is where you started entering the forest. My friend and his siblings alleged if you left a belonging on the side of the fence, not necessarily in the forest, it would be returned to you sometime later. I love it. Super cryptic and of low stakes. I'll run with this story for now. The first night I was there, I threw a hat I brought across the fence, and a few hours later my friend told me he found it on his porch. It didn't seem like proof of anything to me. I assumed he was just messing with me. I tried again the same night, monitoring my friend in the process, and when he went out to have a cigarette, I found the hat on the porch. Whatever. One of his siblings could have been in on the prank. The second night, unbeknownst to my friend, I took a belt buckle of his and threw it as far as I could across the fence, and again it suffered the exact same fate, on their front porch just a few hours later. I still wasn't super convinced. Maybe someone saw me and quickly went looking. At this point I started to get creeped out, but my disbelief still prevailed. On the third night we decided to go into the forest. It was me, my friend, and my friend's friend. We climbed over the fence and started walking across it towards the forest, and get about 50 feet deep, when all of our flashlights went off in unison. My friend yelled for us to go back, and I didn't question it. We ran. But in the process I dropped my hat. I was fidgeting with it as we walked. When we got back into the house, my hat was inside, in their basement, in my suitcase zipped up. This shook me greatly, because my friend already had a sizable head start versus me. When we ran all the way back, there's no way he could have gone back to pick up the hat. I was with him when we all reached the house. Compounding this, we ran a straight line back to the house. There's no way someone could have grabbed it and ran a different route to beat us home. And on top of it all, we lock the house before we embark on our nightly walks. And it wasn't a duplicate hat either, unless they managed to replicate the wear and tear of my hat to a T. We didn't talk about it. I was done with it, and wanted nothing more to do with the forest. We all just basically said, "Oh, this just happened," and then dropped it completely. I left my hat with him when I left for home, half hoping and half dreading it would find its way back to me, but it never did. My friend and I kind of fell out of favor with each other for unrelated reasons shortly after this. If we ever reconcile, and it's been years since, I would want to talk to him about this and maybe even visit again. Their stories of occurrences in this forest are numerous, and if it's just for my curiosity, I would love to explore this more. I thought I'd share a few stories I heard from my ex-boyfriend's mother that I thought were pretty fascinating. We're all from the same reservation, so I can explain the setting pretty well. Basically, there's this one bush road that takes you from the reservation to deep into the woods until you get to another town. But that stretch of dirt road goes on for about 45 minutes. I think it was an old logging road, but we just call it the limit. And we use the area of forest for camping, fishing, ski-doo riding, and four-wheel riding and stuff. But it's also just a chill road to drive down with your friends. If you're from a small town, you know how it is. She had 2 paranormal experiences on this particular road, which isn't entirely out of the ordinary.
My dad even has an experience on this road too. In fact, the road is known for all manner of strange things. But it's fine, no one's scared of it, and I drive down it to go watch pretty sunsets. It's chill. The first story is about a weird time loop. She and her cousin were driving down this road to go get some water, since there was also a natural spring around there. On their way back, their car stalls out and just won't start up again. This happened back in the 80s, so there were no cell phones you could use to call for help, so they started walking. They weren't too far, and they had plenty of daylight left, so it was fine. But as they're walking, they see another car stopped in the distance. So they think, oh cool, we can get a ride from these guys. But as they approach it, they see that it's the same make and model of their car. They get closer and realize it is their car. They're confused as hell, but can completely verify it's their car by looking in the windows. The sweater she left in the back seat, the empty pop can her cousin was drinking out of. Everything inside was exactly as they left it. They didn't know what to do. They hadn't turned off the dirt road at all. They hadn't even walked far enough to make it onto another trail they could turn off of. They thought it was weird, but figured they should just keep walking, as it's all they could do. They kept going, and sure enough, up ahead down the road there's a car parked, the same as before. This time they're tripping the hell out. They run up, and it's their car again. Her cousin gets a stick from the woods and leaves it on the hood of the car, saying that if they keep walking and the same thing happens, they can at least see if the stick would be moved. They take off walking and it happens again. This time the stick is gone. She described a feeling of being afraid that the loop would just go on and on forever, but it didn't. The next time they walked down the road, they realized they were able to walk further and eventually made it back to the res. They got help and towed the car, but never got an explanation or figured out what really happened. She has no idea why the stick that they left on the hood of the car disappeared. They really have zero idea, and neither do I. The second story is about a UFO sighting she had with some friends on that same road. This happened years later after the first incident, maybe early 90s, and it was during the summertime. She and her friends were riding around in a car, having a few beers, not the driver of course, and listening to music. One of their friends commented that there must be a four-wheeler out in the woods, because it's weird since there's no trail there. They look to see what he's talking about, and all you see are these white lights emanating from deep in the woods. You can see that there's a source of light, but you can't see the object itself through the trees. The driver slows down and turns down the music. She described that there wasn't anything too alarming about what they were seeing at that point, but they were feeling that something wasn't right. And she said that everyone felt it, because all of them got quiet as they looked out the windows, which were wide open. When things got quiet, they were able to hear a low humming. She had a hard time describing the humming, just that it was a very low hum, but almost felt like a ringing in the ears. They all heard it. They were silent, looking at the lights, but then whatever it was shot up directly into the sky, and they said they saw a UFO. This was so long ago, I wish I could describe more about it. But she did say that the second it shot into the sky, it changed into all sorts of colors that seemed to rotate around the craft. It paused right above the tree line for a few seconds and then just took off right into the horizon, lights changing again as it moved. And that's it. It's weird too that everyone's experience on this road is so vastly different. There are some sightings of creatures from our Algonquin folklore. There's Bigfoot sightings, UFO sightings, the time loop, and then I have other friends who just heard really creepy singing that got closer and closer. We also just found out that our entire reservation is sitting atop a huge uranium deposit, apparently the largest in our province, but I'm not sure. Nuclear mining companies kept trying to build mines, but we keep refusing. I'm wondering if that has something to do with it, because of the amount of paranormal stuff happening around here is pretty wild.
Growing up, I lived behind an old cemetery, and our house backed up to a wooded area with a creek. My cousins lived on the same street, just 2 houses down, so us and our neighborhood friends played in the woods a whole lot. All of our yards backed up to the trees, and it was like a long and skinny stretch of tree around a creek. But it was obvious that someone or something walked those trails often, as it almost seemed as if someone was taking care of the worn-out path. But other than the following 2 stories, I never saw anything or anyone in the woods, and our town and neighborhood were very safe. The first story happened when 7 or 8 of us were playing hide and seek, and we split into 3 groups. The eldest of us was my brother, who was around 15. Up to that point, because we had never seen anyone or anything else in there, we had never had any indication that the woods weren't safe. So as I was saying, we were playing hide and seek, and I was teamed up with my cousin who was 13, I was 10, and my younger cousin of 8. I honestly can't remember if we were doing the hiding or the seeking, but we all saw this thing. At first, I thought it was one of the other kids walking across the trail, but it was as dark as night, and all of us were wearing brightly colored clothes. It was walking or maybe crawling on all 4s, and as tall as a deer, but it wasn't one. I didn't see what its head looked like, thank goodness, as it was low in the brush. Now the woods aren't that thick, and we never saw this thing do anything but cross the path. It's like it disappeared into thin air once it had completely crossed the trail. We sat there for a second, just staring at the place it had crossed, before my older cousin asked if we saw it too, and of course we had. The younger cousin started crying, and we grabbed onto each other to run. Luckily, we were literally right behind someone's house, so we ran up the side of a house back onto our street. A few of the dads went to gather the boys and brought them home. We asked to make sure it wasn't one of them playing a trick on us, and they swore that it wasn't. We believed them. This was a few years later. The trees had been thinned out a lot as they were pouring streets and building a new neighborhood on the other side of the creek. But buildings hadn't started yet besides that. As I said, we routinely hung out in the woods with our friends. Well, one day I was on the other side of the creek, closest to the new neighborhood with my friend. We used to build little clubhouses down there and make mud pies and whatnot. So we were on the other side of the creek finding supplies when we heard someone crashing through the woods. We crouched down, looking over some tall grass, and went silent. A man came running through the woods. Not even on the trail, he was looking over his shoulder frantically as he ran. I don't know why, but it freaked us out so much. We were only 20 yards from my backyard, so we stayed crouching and hiding for a few minutes before we took off running back home. Not a big thing. Obviously, there's a logical explanation for the second story, but the first one really shook us. Any ideas on what it could have been would be appreciated. I'll start this off by saying that I'm not a very spiritual person, traditionally. I've always been quite cynical of paranormal activity. And even though I know that there may be some things beyond our understanding, I've always believed there's usually a very logical and scientific reason for most paranormal occurrences. Everyone in my friendship group also shared this view, until what happened the other night. So, my mates. My boyfriend and I live on a uni residence, which is surrounded by a dense Australian forest. I've been here for a year now, and I've enjoyed going on multiple bushwalks, both during the day and night. I grew up surrounded by the bush. My high school was on 200 acres of bush, and I live on a country property in the middle of nowhere. So at this point, the land and the forest have become my safe space. I have been in the uni forest plenty of times to take a breather from uni stress, and have never noticed anything sinister in there. Over the past few weeks, my boyfriend and his mates have been building a pretty impressive fort in the bush. They have spent every free minute taking an axe to old dead logs and building this fort, which is about the size of a caravan. Understandably, they're pretty proud of this creation, so last night they decided to show some third years what they'd been working on. As they were walking towards the fort, these third years stopped and told us they didn't want to go any further. They told us they'd had some bad experiences in that section of the forest, and they told us that they were too scared to venture in it at night. I thought these third years were merely pranking us, so I began joking and making light of the situation. To my surprise though, my boyfriend Matt and his best friend Darcy were very accommodating of the third year's fear, and told them they'd be happy to accompany them out of the bush. They oddly seemed kind of freaked out themselves. I then remembered that Matt had actually told me before that the bush could be quite scary at night, which actually amused me because usually he's the type of annoying macho man who believes fear is a sign of weakness. One of the third years, Nick, wanted to press on, but the other two, Kyle and Adam, wanted to head back. I had seen the fort so many times, I volunteered to go back with Kyle and Adam. As we were leaving the forest, I asked them both what made them so afraid. They told me they didn't want to talk about it when they were there, but they did point out to me that the section of the forest we were in was unnaturally still and quiet. As a cynical person, I had to admit that it was a bit odd that the only section we were in was dead still. Where about 20 meters away across a road, the trees were blowing madly in the wind. Once we had left the forest, Kyle and Adam's demeanor changed significantly, and they finally felt comfortable expressing to me what they had experienced in the bush before. To make a very long story short, across the 3 years that they had lived on the residence, as they and a few other people have had multiple encounters with what seemed to be an odd-looking spirit in the shape of a man in a hunched-over position. The spirit was always accompanied by the bush going unnaturally silent and an overwhelming feeling of impending evil and doom. He told me the reason the forest goes so still and quiet is because something inside it is listening to you and is hunting you. Kyle, being a man of indigenous culture, told me that at one point the spirit was so close to one of his friends that he had to call in an Aboriginal elder to run a smoking ceremony. This elder told Kyle that the presence of evil was overwhelming in the forest, and she warned him to never go too deep in again. Kyle also began educating me about other Aboriginal legends and expressing his fear of the noises, like screams and whistles, distinctly human screams and whistles, not bird or foxes, and the feelings he had experienced within the bush. At this point, I listened ardently, but was also viewing these stories as purely fictitious, as opposed to something to be concerned about. Even though I didn't really believe in the stories, I was interested in learning more about the Aboriginal culture, and was honored that Kyle was opening up to me about something which seemed to be so very personal and significant to him. About half an hour later, Matt, Darcy and Nick emerged from the forest and headed back over to us. As they approached, I could tell that they seemed pretty obviously shaken by something, and for the first time that night, I suddenly felt very anxious. Matt and Darcy explained that they were showing Nick the fort, when all of a sudden, they felt an overwhelming feeling of dread, and they all unanimously decided that they needed to leave. Matt also admitted to momentarily catching a glimpse of what he said looked like a hunched-over man in front of a tree near the fort. He said he would have thought it a shadow at first, had he not seen the man's eyes reflecting in the light of his phone torch. At this point, my belief that they were pranking us diminished entirely, as Kyle was visibly freaking out and Matt looked shaken. I could tell they weren't acting, and I also didn't believe Kyle would exploit his own culture for the sake of a cheap joke. We all now headed back to our respective dorms, and figured we'd better get from as far as the forest as possible. It felt much better to be inside, only until Matt turned to me and suddenly said, "I need to go back and talk to Kyle." When I looked into his eyes, I could tell something was very wrong, and my anxiety amped up significantly. Him behaving this way was very unusual, and something was clearly bothering him. So we headed over to Kyle's unit and knocked on the door. Matt explained to both of us that 2 days prior, he had come across a massive tree in the clearing that was covered in some odd sorts of bulbs. Him being an absolute moron, decided it would be a clever idea to take an axe to the bulbs to see what they were made of. He admitted that the reason he was asking Kyle about it was because he couldn't shake the memory of the tree, and it was becoming unbearable and stressful. Kyle was obviously furious about this, and it turned out that Matt had damaged a very sacred and ancient tree, and Kyle believed that Matt may have angered the forest and spirits that dwelled within it. He asked Matt if he had experienced any incidences over the past few days, and Matt matter-of-factly told us that the gash on his face, caused by a falling branch that missed his eye by a mere centimeter, actually happened only 20 minutes after he axed the tree. He also told Kyle that he had lied when he initially told us that he'd seen the hunched man for the first time tonight. He had in fact seen him 3 times over the course of the past week, and twice in the past 2 days. He also told us that the reason he left the forest the night of the axing of the tree, beside the fact he had a bleeding cut on his face, was because of all of the boys working on the fort, when they suddenly heard a very loud and very unnatural sound in the forest, something between a human scream and a whistle. They said they thought it was an animal, and everything else had suddenly gone completely silent. When they heard the noise again, closer, they grabbed their stuff and legged it. It was also at this point when I realized that over the past 2 days, and I could literally pin it to whenever Matt was around, I had felt extremely agitated and sad. It was a very intense feeling, and I felt really guilty, because it was nothing Matt was doing to upset me that was causing me distress. It was simply as it being his energy, or his vibe that was bothering me. I mean, I love this man. We'd never had any arguments. But the night after he'd axed the tree, which he didn't tell me about, and which I don't condone by the way, I remember feeling such a distinct feeling of discomfort whenever he was around. It got so bad at one point that I locked myself in my room and cried all night about it. I was confused and sad that the person I loved was making me distressed when he'd seemingly done nothing. I pinned it on my period, except it's not due for another week, and usually doesn't cause my emotions to run haywire. I'm still not necessarily saying that the tree and Matt's energy were linked per se, but it was a feeling that was so weird to me and so unexplainable to begin with. It almost made sense. Kyle now told Matt that he, I, and everyone else involved in making the tree fort needs to be saged as quickly as possible to ward off any evil spirits. Matt, despite his initial disbelief, agreed immediately, and we met another Aboriginal student called Ash and their partner Key, and they provided us the sage. Before the ceremony, Key told us that we were going to gauge the vibes, and Ash told us that Key had an innate ability to feel spirits in the wind. The second that Key walked out of the unit, I swear to God that the wind did one of the weirdest things I've ever experienced. It was the biggest gust of wind so far, and it carried the faintest howl of about 5 different notes and octaves. It came from well beyond the tree line like a wave, and flew unnaturally quickly in our direction. It flew through me, as if collecting my shadow, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It didn't feel sinister though, and Key reassured us that it was a normal phenomenon. and that they experience it whenever in touch with the spirits. What wasn't normal, though, was the smell that permeated in the air about 30 meters from the tree line. It was almost artificial, like nothing I'd ever smelt before, and it clearly scared Key, as they began to tell us something was very wrong. She told us that something was stalking us from just beyond the tree line and that it was very angry. Apparently we needed to begin the sage now, or else it would follow us into the residence. As we walked to the glow of a nearby lamppost, Key told us it was already too late, and that the evil thing was already pursuing us. And that was when the brand new and relatively expensive lighter we had recently bought broke. It just completely broke. We tried to light the sage, but the button fell off and the thing cracked open. We now needed a new lighter, and Key told us the thing was getting closer and closer. Whether it was related or not, I couldn't stop shaking despite being warm under many layers of clothing. As we packed, we headed to a room to get a new lighter, and Ash advised us that Matt should stay away as we tried to light the sage. After a few attempts, where the fire bent around the sage, and I mean literally was repelled by the stick, Matt stood far away enough and it lit. Once we were fully saged, and we were all feeling significantly better and were ready to sleep, it was probably around 2:30 a.m. I got back to Matt's room, now completely comfortable around him for the first time in 2 days, and we got into bed. Matt and I spoke for a while about random things, nothing ghostly, and I ended up feeling very comfortable and happy as we eventually stopped talking and he drifted off. I'm a bit of an insomniac. It takes me a while to doze off, so I usually go on my phone until I start to feel sleep grasping at me. That was when it happened. It started with a very faint tap that I paid not too much mind to, but in hindsight, I didn't know the source. Then the dogs from the suburb across the uni went nuts. It was a very faint sound, but they were certainly disturbed. Nothing made me think it was anything paranormal, until multiple things happened at once. The room went very still and silent, as if a ward of cotton had replaced the air. The heater stopped, the faint noises of breathing stopped, even Matt next to me was silent, and then my legs went icy cold, unnaturally cold. The rest of my body was warm, but my legs were freezing. Then my whole body just as suddenly became uncomfortably hot. Initially I was worried. I was having a stroke or heart attack or something. Finally, an all-consuming, overwhelming, intense feeling of evil permeated everything. It was evil and angry, and like nothing I'd ever felt before. I couldn't link it to a specific spot in the room, but I knew it was strongest near Matt. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't speak. I knew it wasn't sleep paralysis because I'd been on my phone the whole time and wasn't remotely sleepy. I could also move freely and didn't feel paralyzed, so I sat bolt upright and felt a panic attack approaching. I'm usually not one to cry very easily, and I'm never one to have a panic attack, but this rendered me to both. I was sitting upright and praying with everything I could for this thing to go away. I was shaking and crying. I didn't want to wake the others to ask them if they could feel it too, because I knew it would anger it. I didn't end up needing to wake them though, because Matt suddenly awoke with a start. It scared the life out of me because his voice cut the silence, asking if I was okay. But I wasn't. The thing was now feeling more evil than ever. I couldn't speak, I just sat there terrified. Matt then went dead silent and said, "You feel that, right?" I couldn't even nod. I was praying with everything I could muster, and I'm not even religious. I was just repeating in my mind that I meant no harm, and that I'm sorry if I offended it. I remember saying aloud, "Something is very bad," and Matt just nodded, looking terrified. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime of prayers, the feeling began to diminish, and everything slowly felt calm again. Noise returned, the breathing of others in the dorm, the heater cranked on, and the wind outside resumed. Whatever it was seemed to have left. Once I felt safe enough to lie down, Matt and I snuggled up together and tried our best to fall asleep. I was worried the thing would return when Matt fell asleep in order to attack him when he was vulnerable. But thank God it didn't. My sleep was ridden with nightmares about spirits, and I woke up unnaturally early. In the morning, though, I seemed to feel okay. Matt and I spoke, but he reckons we were both freaked out of the back of a really creepy night. That's weird, though, as that's before the encounter with whatever it was. I was not even remotely scared. To be honest, when I went to bed that night, I was still pretty skeptical that there was even a spirit to begin with. Not that morning, though. I'm still convinced that it was a spirit in the room that night, as I've never felt anything before or since like that. I've watched horror movies, intentionally freaked myself out in creepy places before, and only that night did I feel some sort of presence. I asked Kyle, Ash, and Key that morning if we should have become concerned about it visiting our room, and they told us that if whatever it was wanted to hurt us, it would have done so. They said they believe it was more of a warning for us to leave it alone, more of a threat than an act of violence. We also then discovered, as Darcy went back to the bush that day, Matt and I declined the invite, that their well-structured, carefully constructed fort that could carry the weight of all of them had collapsed in the night. It wasn't a stormy night. It wasn't any more windy than any other night had been, but the fort had entirely caved in upon itself, almost as if it had been trampled by a large creature. Whether these things are coincidences or not, I'm not sure, but it sure freaked the hell out of me. I have not had any odd experiences since, but I also have not returned to the forest, and I still don't know if I want to or not. This happened about 5 years ago. I just remembered it today and realize I don't know how to explain it. I worked a swing shift. It was 11 p.m. to midnight when I got home. My dog was in the backyard. I went inside and took off my shoes right away, getting ready to take a shower. However, my dog started barking frantically. This was common for him to do, as he was protective. I would check, and there was actually a problem every time, just in case. I went out on deck into the backyard. He was barking at the bottom of the stairs facing away from me, which was unusual for him to do. I started talking, and he stopped barking immediately. Then I heard very loud and heavy breathing. I thought it was my dog panting, but he was not. The sound seemed to come from above me, and he was standing below me. It sounded like someone hyperventilating, like they were trying to breathe as loudly as possible. I could not see anything out of the ordinary, and decided to investigate. I went down the stairs and examined my yard and the next door neighbors, as this was a suburban area. When I got near, I heard the breathing. I suddenly heard the sound from a yard further away. Once I got to that yard, the sound jumped to the next. Being young and dumb, I continued down the street. Every time I got close, the sound would jump. It always sounded the same. It was the same loudness and pitch, always the same distance away. I continued down the road until I reached a bend. My feet hurt, so I stopped for a minute and realized that due to the curve I could not see the place where I heard the sound, but it seemed to be just within the edges of a wooded area. I was seriously considering chasing after it, when it occurred to me how foolish it would be to investigate alone like that, especially without shoes. My phone was dead, and I suddenly felt like I was prey to an animal or some kind of predator that was trying to lure me further away. I immediately turned and walked back as quickly as possible. It may have just been my anxiety from being alone in the dark, but I could not stop feeling that something terrible would have happened if I went further. I never heard the sound again, or had any weird experiences like that. I no longer live in that area. The best mundane answer I have is a bird of some kind. What is most creepy to me is I have since read stories of people following a noise and then had a feeling of something luring them into the woods. I know a lot of these stories might not be true or have simple explanations, but if anyone has any suggestions for what I heard, I'd love to hear them. This was in the Midwest United States. My 6th grade band was going to a competition. One half of the band was in one car, and I and 3 others were in the intern's truck. My mum was a chaperone and was driving alone. I had to leave to visit my grandparents straight from the competition instead of driving a few hours home first. Anyway, the car with the other part of the band was already at the hotel hanging out in the lobby. My truck and my mum were driving right next to each other on the way to the hotel. The GPS took us both on one of those back roads that's not really on any maps. Extremely old 2-lane roads in the middle of the woods with trees growing inwards into the road. As soon as we got on the road, I got a very eerie vibe, and I think everyone else in the truck did too. After driving on it for a bit, we reached this very old bridge and had to slow down to go over it. As we went over it, me and my friend looked behind our car, and both of us swear we saw my mum's car right behind us. Headlights on, correct brand, model, car color, etc. It was dark, so we couldn't see inside of it. After driving on this road for about 15 minutes, we pulled out from the road, and we were right next to the hotel. My mum had already been there for 10 minutes. By the way, the other car had never passed us, so she couldn't have just sped ahead of us. My mum had been behind us when we were on that road. I have no idea what happened there, but the rest of the night just went on as normal.
I am usually pretty skeptical about the unexplainable. I have, in fact, shared stories about this in the past, as I've had many unexplainable things happen during my life. Anyway, the woods by my house here, I love them. They've never bothered me. I was in Boy Scouts for 5 years and I've never been creeped out by the woods. I've been alone in the woods and it's never been an issue. But those woods are different. I've never been in the woods, but I've been just outside them. Once I was waiting for my girlfriend's mum to fall asleep, so she could sneak out for me. She told me to wait by the woods in my car. When I was there, I felt like I was being watched and felt very uneasy. I didn't feel safe at all. I didn't want to get out my car, to be honest, and I repeatedly made sure that my car was locked, and I shrunk down in my seat a bit. Afterwards, I spoke to my girlfriend about it. She mentioned the woods in the past, but I didn't think it was those particular woods. She told me about some of the experiences she had in there. I trust my girlfriend not to make this kind of stuff up. She isn't that kind of person. But I'm more of a believer if it happens to me, or if I witness something personally. She shared with me a few experiences. Like once, she was in her car with her ex by the woods. I'm pretty sure it was exactly the same spot we were at, in fact, and they both heard a bone-chilling scream. It was off in the distance, so it was faint. It sounded like a woman's scream. She heard it a few times. She's also seen white humanoid figures with long arms. She told me that her and some of her friends went into the woods and would leave each other alone for a bit, as a sort of game. When it was her turn, she felt like she was being watched in all directions, and she heard leaves rustling like something was moving. It was only for 5 minutes, and then her friends came back. When it was her turn, they found them in a fetal position with scratch marks on their arm. They weren't too deep. Once, they found the guy. They helped him and booked it out the woods. Despite those stories and being too afraid to get out my car, I didn't really have a reason to anyway. I want to go investigate for myself, but I sure as hell won't go alone. But my girlfriend is done with those woods. There's no way she'd ever go back there. If I ever do go into those woods, I'll record what I find and share it. Her house. I haven't seen much that happens in person. Most of it has been over FaceTime. I've only seen a few things for myself. Others she'll tell me. We FaceTime late at night so she can sleep, as my presence relaxes her, just knowing I'm there. One time when she was dead asleep, I saw the blanket slide off her a bit. It wasn't her moving or anything, the blanket just got pulled off, slowly, maybe an inch or so. I found that creepy, to say the least. Her phone also has moved on its own while I've been on FaceTime. One time I heard tapping on her screen and thought it was her doing it to mess with me. I told her to knock it off because I was trying to sleep too. I look over at my phone and she was facing away from the phone and asleep. These are personal experiences I've had. Some of the things she's told me are creepy as hell, but I'm not quite sure I believe them. The real creepy stuff started happening a few weeks ago. She went to her dad's house about 3 hours north in the middle of nowhere, where she came back and started hearing footsteps running across her room late at night. She also hears laughing and crying. She feels like she's being watched, and she says she'll see a little girl hiding behind her closet door. She has a dresser next to her closet, and it leaves a little gap. That's where she says she sees the girl. The past few nights, she hasn't been able to sleep at all. I don't know if there really is a girl. Like I said, I haven't witnessed it myself, but whatever's going on, it really is keeping her up at night. I've spent the night at her house though. I've heard knocking on the windows. She has a fenced backyard, and the fence is one of those tall plastic ones that would be quite challenging to get over. The creepiest part is knocking always happens during the witching hour. 3 knocks, sometimes rapid and sometimes slower. She says it's every night. The one time I checked the time, it was 3:20, and all I know it's between 3 to 4. There's no way that it's a tree or anything like that. If it was, the fact that there's only one knocking around a specific time and only 3 times is very unlikely. Hopefully whatever's in her room doesn't follow her. We're looking to get an apartment together at the end of the year. In the meantime, at least, is there anything you can do to ward off whatever negative energies or entities there are? I've read somewhere that 3 knocks is a sign of a demon, but I'm not sure if it is anything like that, or if there's anything that we can do at all. I also want to mention that her dad's house has a very dark energy. I'm good at sensing energies of places. One time we went there for a few days back in April. Whenever we were at the house, we were both irritable towards each other. We would leave and everything would be fine. She stayed there for a bit with her ex for a month, and it caused a lot of issues, and they ended up breaking up after staying there for a while. A little while after being there, we nearly break up. It's also important to say that she has had a traumatic past, and a lot of horrible things have happened in that house. Nothing like anyone's life being taken. I don't want to go into details, but there certainly might be some dark things based on those events still lingering in the walls.
I've never watched shows about aliens or Bigfoot with any intensity, but one weekend the wife and I were stuck inside because of storms, and we watched this show with a dude who supposedly is a survivalist who wasn't a Bigfoot researcher but was intrigued because of his encounters he believed were Bigfoot. They were walking in this area that had these crazy trees all pulled down and twisted up that supposedly couldn't have been done naturally, and they were too big for humans to do this. So anyway, I live in the sticks surrounded by state land that has big hills, swamps and ponds big enough to be almost lakes, and I've never heard anyone in town talk about Bigfoot or anything. I've heard weird screaming and whatnot sounds like what they played on the show, but this time I saw firsthand what they portrayed on the show. So we go moral mushroom hunting on the land the day after we watch the show, and about a mile into these hills we come upon this huge wad of trees all twisted up together. They were woven together like a rope. They weren't little either, bigger than a person could pull down and twist up. They ranged from 6 to 8 inches at the base of the trunk. We take a few pictures because we thought it was cool and moved on. About 45 minutes later, we come upon another one, and now my wife is getting a little nerved out because the woods are dead silent. We have our son who is 7, so decide it's time to leave. I unstrap my firearm, and as we're walking, a limb of a tree about 2 inches in diameter and 3 foot long comes whizzing past us. I look at her and I point in the direction we came from and said to get moving and take our son. I pull out the firearm and walk quickly backwards, covering their back.
I have no idea who or what flung it at us, but we weren't sticking around to find out. The last thing that happened was a loud knocking like someone slamming wood on wood. We finished walking back to the house, not really saying anything to each other until we got home.
Nearly 20 years ago, my best friend and I were camping with my family, a place we both had basically grown up at, so we knew the location quite well. Being the delinquents we were, we both left the campsite around midnight to 1 a.m. to smoke a joint. We walked 5 minutes to a park that was on the ocean, with a dense forest jutting up against it. We were on the beach when we finished smoking, and are enjoying the stars for a few minutes when we both noticed something about 150 feet up the beach along the forest trail. I still have a hard time describing what I saw. There were approximately 6 orbs of light appearing on the trail which runs parallel to the beach. They form in a horizontal line and begin moving towards us. These lights are orbs, and unlike a flashlight, they do not project any light. No beams like a flashlight, no area like a candle, none of the trees nearby lit up. They were more like a white light rather than the orange of a candle. Upon them moving towards us, we were both filled by an immediate sense of dread and decide that we're not sticking around. We hightail it out of there. My friend glanced over while we were running perpendicular to the location, and he insists he saw them from a circle and hover down to the ground. Upon discussing it for a bit, we go back armed with weapons and flashlights to see, and there's nothing to note. I have to iterate that this was not in a location where fireflies reside, and even if there was a human element behind the lights, they were moving towards us at a pace people couldn't possibly move through a wooded forest in the pitch dark. I'm in my 30s now with a family, and whenever I see my friend, we still talk about it and shake our heads to try and explain it. What are your thoughts? I work in a pub. It's about 2 miles away in the next village. I usually finish work quite late, 1 or 2 a.m., and have to cycle home. The only route is a small road that goes through somewhat large woods. There's a 1-mile stretch that has absolutely no streetlights. It's pitch black, and as I'm cycling through the woods, I start hearing this loud screeching sound, similar to a small dying animal. It scared the hell out of me, so I started pedaling fast. I continued to hear it, and it seemed as if it were progressing towards me. I used my phone's camera light to navigate, although it isn't impossible to see without it. I point my phone behind me, and I swear I caught sight of some humanoid creature on all fours running at me. Call it mind games, but this was pretty vivid. I continued to cycle as fast as I can, as I'd been cycling long distance from a young age. I'd like to say I'm reasonably fast, yet I continue to hear the screeching and the light patting of footsteps of whatever is chasing me. I try to turn my phone light off, and after a few seconds I manage to do so. The patting becomes quieter, and I hear one last screech from whatever it was, and I have never been so scared in all my life. A few days later, I was doing the same cycle back again. After cycling for a few minutes, I heard the same scream that I heard back then. I was terrified. The first time wasn't just some stupid coincidence. It sounded far away and didn't seem as though it was directed towards me. I kept my light off this time. I assumed whatever did it didn't see me, but I began to pump it home. This is when it gets bad. Throughout the forest in all directions, I heard what must have been at least 10 other screams, all sounding exactly the same in harmony. I honestly thought that was it. I was going to die at any second, but I very happily made it home, and I don't know what it is, but I know I never want to go back there again. For context, our woods have deer and foxes, no mountain lions nor boars. I know what they both sound like, as my house has a lot of woods surrounding it, and they sound like nothing I heard. I can still hear it ringing in my head. I'm so terrified,
and don't know what to do.
7 years ago, my wife and I purchased a property and 11 acres of woods in a rural part of northeastern Minnesota. The woods were connected to a large acreage of fields and woods, about 160 acres, and although sparsely populated, the land is near a fairly busy state highway. There are some housing developments in the area, but they are 3 to 4 miles away, and the majority of land around our property are farm fields, woods and rivers. It's remote, but with towns so close I wouldn't call it wild by any means. I'm mentioning this because I've heard of many Native American legends of things in the deep northern woods of Minnesota and Canada, but the area in which we live is not that. Rural, yes, but not the endless north woods. I would like to say I'm not a believer in the supernatural, and have never been afraid of the woods or the outdoors, even though I have a healthy sense to caution and respect it because of large bears, moose, wolves, and other potentially dangerous wildlife. I am also an avid hunter and mountaineer, and have experienced many nights in the wilderness. I have had numerous encounters with dangerous animals or situations, so I'm not spooked easily. Knowing my state of mind is important to my story because many so-called supernatural encounters can be explained by people with an already high level of belief, anxiety or fear, which would not be my case. Well, that all changed after a few weeks after moving in. The house and land had been abandoned for a few years due to foreclosure, so a lot of work needed to be done to get it back in shape. Wildlife had grown accustomed to no human presence, and black bears frequently roamed the yard at night, along with many other woodland creatures. We also found a lot of animal bones scattered throughout the woods, and coyotes were abundant. One night during those first few weeks we had a rainstorm, and I was worried about a broken downspout potentially causing a basement leak. It was around 10 p.m., so I grabbed my headlamp and headed outside to deal with the situation. Behind our house is a fairly large swampy area that divides the woods. I had my back facing this area while fiddling with the downspout, when suddenly I had this intense feeling of dread. It's really hard to explain the feeling, but it was like my body knew something was back there. It was very unusual, based on the circumstances, never having felt this type of fear before. I tried to stay calm and slowly turned around to point my headlamp back towards the swamp. What I saw was something I still cannot explain. Eyes, numerous, glowing and reflecting, staring back at me. These were not eye reflections that you typically see with a deer or other animal, since they were at different heights. And when I pointed my headlamp spot beam directly at them, where you would expect a head to be, there was nothing but weeds and trees. When I turned the headlamp off, they were still there, and glowing as if light were being shined. They didn't move. They just stared through me. Needless to say at this, I bolted and ran as fast as I could back into the house and explained it away as a deer or raccoons. Later that summer, I was sitting out on our screened-in porch that partially faces the swamp and connected woods to the west. It was approximately 11 p.m. when I began to hear what sounded like a bear fighting with or attacking a cow. Since there was a small farm to the southwest of my property, I assumed that perhaps a cow had wandered into the woods and been attacked by a bear. I really didn't know if this was something a bear would actually do, but it was my only guess based on the sounds I was hearing at the time. It was clearly some kind of roar, like a bear, but then followed by a frantic-sounding cow mooing. This went on for over an hour, and it was perhaps one of the most horrible sounds I'd ever seen. Even though it sounded so strange and almost supernatural, it didn't frighten me since I had this rational explanation in my head. Even weirder, the same series of sounds happened again the next summer. These first few years I never investigated the area of the woods that the sounds came from, as it was not my property. A few years later, I had the chance to purchase this area and 70 acres to the west, which consisted of the woods that connected to mine, as well as a few fields, more woods and ponds. As part of purchasing this land, I spent a great deal of time walking around it to get a good understanding of its value and layout. As part of my walk, I was able to get a much better look at the farm setup to the south. The farm did have cows, as I suspected, but to my surprise, the area they were keeping in was a long distance from my house, much too far for me to hear them, and the fence was also extremely well built as well as electrified. Looking at it, there was no way a cow was wandering off that farm. I didn't really think about this fact until recently, but I feel it's best to explain things in chronological order. After acquiring the property, I proceeded to put up tree stands in various locations along with trail cameras in order to prepare for the upcoming deer hunting season. One spot was the hilly woods where I heard those sounds many years prior. Again, I did not connect these two things until now. The area was very odd, as whenever I hiked through there, I always saw some strange new thing. One time my son and I found an old game snare tied to a tree, with what looked like dried blood on the tree bark. Another time we found an at least 100-year-old tree with a barbed wire fence completely spiraling the tree trunk, growing in and out of it at different intervals. I've also found many tree trunks with very large scratches or claw marks, not resembling an antler rub, perhaps a bear. We'd almost always find dead animal bones in the area, and even this winter, I found a few deer legs snapped and picked clean. My sons have found numerous animal skulls there as well. As I was saying, I put a game camera in this year since I'd seen tracks and signs and wanted to get a sense of the best places to hunt. I've placed one out there many seasons and have yet to capture a single thing on it. Nothing. My son has posted there a few times for hunting season and has mentioned the strange sense of quiet. He's used to the forest sounds returning after sitting there for long periods of time, but in this spot there are never really any sounds. He has mentioned hearing something walking around though. Another incident occurred one hunting season when I was entering this area en route to another stand, when I saw a violent thrashing thing in the foliage moving fast and crossing from left to right but moving away from my position. I of course encounter deer and bear all the time, so I am familiar with how they move when spooked, but this was something different. Whatever this thing was making a high-pitched trumpeting, combined with the bellowing sound that was like nothing I'd ever heard from an animal outside of an elk, which we didn't have in this area. It wasn't bounding, and there wasn't the raised white tail or large dark mass to indicate a bear or deer. There really didn't appear to be a body at all, just whipping and falling leaves and branches, along with deafening sounds. A year after this incident, my son went hiking out of the woods to try and find me since I was out doing some forest management. As he walked through this area, he thought he spotted me coming through the woods quickly, but soon noticed the walk and clothing were not like mine. Whoever it was a lot taller than me, and he described him as extremely thin. He said the person he saw did not notice him at all, and seemed to be walking in a straight line like they had tunnel vision. Seeing something in this part of the woods, and their direction of travel, didn't at all make sense, since there really would be no reason to be there or head out that far, as it leads to deep ravines and uncrossable rivers. After he found me and explained what he saw, I quickly went over to investigate to see if we had a trespasser. I hiked for quite a while but never found anything or anyone. If someone was there, they either got picked up on the road or vanished. That same year my son had a friend over, and they went for a late afternoon walk in the woods. As it began to get dark, they made their way back by walking on the edge of the field that is next to this area of woods. As they passed by, they said they saw a figure a little ways off in the trees. Whatever they saw was near one of the hills in this patch of forest and seemed to be making some kind of hand gestures. It began walking slowly towards them when they called out, "Hey, hello?" He or it stopped still and said nothing. It was at this point the boys sensed something wasn't right and bolted back towards the house. They rushed into the house and told me what they saw, and I of course laughed it off as their mind playing tricks on them. My son described the figure as tall, about 10 to 15 feet, but with skinny arms, and his body was dark all over. Not hairy per se, just dark. And even though it was an animal at first because of the weird way it looked, he couldn't really describe it very well other than gaunt or skinny and strangely dark. Me, being the curious and protective father that I am, was worried about it being trespassers, drug addicts, or both. So I told them I would go to take a look. They took me to the area and pointed to where it was standing, and I headed into the woods. Since it was winter, there was snow on the ground. I thought it would be easy to find the tracks of whatever this thing was to find out where it came from or went. When I go to the spot, there wasn't a single track or disturbance in the snow. There was no way an animal or man could have been here and not left any tracks. They had either made it up or their minds had played tricks on them, or so I thought. To this day, my son and his friend still swear they saw it clear as day, and I can definitely attest that their fright was real. My wife had also experienced this strange thrashing sounds and other feelings of dread or being watched in these parts of the woods, and generally refuses to go over there anymore. All of this brings me to today, where I had a sudden realization that all of the strange sounds, sightings, bones, and events seems to be centered around this one area, and I'm just at a complete loss for what it all means. It's all too strange to really bring this up and discuss with people I know around here, but I wanted to share this with you in the community, to see if you have any theories or ideas on what we may be dealing with. I'll continue to investigate on my end, but would love to get your feedback.
I'm wondering if anyone has ever had a similar experience or knows what this is, because this thing was a huge part of my life growing up. For years I felt crazy and just accepted I was seeing things, until I came across a few others who claimed to have experienced similar things to me. I was a super anxious kid, the eldest of 3, with a really unhealthy and unhappy family dynamic, up until I moved out. Every night, this heavy sense of dread would fall over the house, and I had major problems sleeping. When I eventually fell asleep, it would be restless and full of nightmares and sleep paralysis, which I still get frequently. A bit of background. When I hit about 12, I started waking up at 3 a.m. every night, thinking the room had suddenly lit up in a bright flash. I just passed it off as a car passing by and the headlights shining through the window. After a few months, I was still waking up at 3 a.m., but before the white flash. It was like a jagged lightning streak across the ceiling, blinding light, and would light up the whole room and make me see spots. It used to terrify me. There was always the heavy dread fear feeling building when it happened, so I used to just lie as still as I could and try to sleep, or at least pretend to. This went on for years. It never got to a point where it didn't scare me, but I kind of got used to it and even named it. One day when I was 16, my mother came to look in my room because she was getting pretty tired of me being all tired and angsty all the time. It's a really small box room, so it didn't take long, and there was absolutely nothing there. She went to take a shower and was alone in the hallway, with the dread feeling building again. I decided to go into my room because it was daylight. What could happen? So I walk in. I froze in there. Everything was completely silent, and the white light exploded from nothing in the middle of my room in front of my face, way brighter than the light in the room already, and more branched out than I'd ever seen it before, kind of like big fingers of lightning. It surrounded me for a second, then retracted back to the space from which it had come from. Needless to say, I lost my mind and had a Blair Witch Project level freak out with snot and everything. My mum and I went for a drive after that. Haven't seen the light that big since. But sometimes I catch a little flash here and there, but very rarely. About a year ago at a bar I work in, we were exchanging a few stories over drinks after hours. I told this story and one of my colleagues told me it was called house lightning. It's a common thing in Latvia where she's from. My boss also said he saw more or less the same flash in a forest a few decades ago, which incidentally is just across the road from where I grew up. Could it be related? Anyone seen anything similar or know what it could be? I completely accept the possibility it could have been a psychological thing, but I'm curious since other people have seen it too, and I haven't been able to find anything about it online.
I have a friend who was doing a construction job near Glacier National Park. The locals on his crew were Native American, and they would have fun joshing my friend by telling him stories and the lore of the local area. One night, after a few beers, he calls them out about one story in particular, and so they took him out and showed him. There's a path accessible only by horseback or on foot, as it winds through dense forests and crosses a few streams that lead to a clearing. In this clearing are 3 trees, lined up side by side, each tree stretched up between 25 to 30 feet tall. What made my friend nope out of there is at the top of the trees were roots, not branches. A full network of roots, like someone or something had pulled them straight from the ground, flipped them around and replanted them in the earth. I have no evidence of this story, just that he was very genuine when he recounted it. He believed what he was telling me, which makes me more inclined to believe that what he saw was true. This happened a few years ago, when I was working at my childhood summer camp. I've certainly gotten strange feelings around the area before, but nothing especially malevolent or frightening. My coworker and I were taking our group for a sleep out, up in some shelters about half a mile into the woods and away from the rest of camp. I'm used to being in the woods, and I generally don't scare easy even at night. So when I woke up in the wee hours of the morning, I set out for the latrines without a second thought. I figured it was around 4 or 5 a.m. based on the red glow of the horizon. The light fell softly through the trees, illuminating the path and the color side of the shelters. The walk was only a few hundred yards, but felt longer with only my flashlight. I was about halfway there before I heard something behind me. Again, I knew these woods. I knew what most of the animals in the area sound like, from the camp's horses to the local family of black bears. Whatever this was, it was huge. Its presence seemed to close in on me from all around, and I could hear twigs snapping, vines tearing, mud squelching underfoot. I'm not fast. I knew that running on an uneven path in the dark wouldn't get me far. So I walked. I walked like I owned the woods, slowly and deliberately until I reached the light on the side of the latrine. The presence then faded. I was even starting to feel good, confident, like I could keep going, keep walking through the dark wood until I reached the sunrise. I had to tell myself to stop, to turn where I meant to turn, and eventually I returned to the shelter and fell asleep. Maybe I would have forgotten about it, if not for the sunrise. I've watched so many sunrises over the lake I should have known better. That red light in the woods wasn't in the east where it should have been. It was out on the west side of the pasture, blood red and a little too bright for where it was pretending to be. The more I think about it, the more it felt like I was being herded somewhere. I haven't met anyone with a similar experience, but my friends have theories from fairies to alien abduction. I'm not sure I believe that, but I'll never go into that part of the woods alone again. This happened to my dad. A few years ago, he was working on this large ranch with his cousin for a very rich guy in Texas. He was going to work with 2 other people, ex-militaries, sergeants both of them, tough guys who had their share at war. The 2 soldiers had been on the ranch longer than my dad and cousin. They knew the ins and outs. One day my dad asks about the forest, if they could go see it or camp someday. The sergeant says they can, but only during the day, as they're not spending the night there. My dad's now confused how 2 John Wicks are afraid of the dark. So the creepy thing is that the ranch has this night vision cameras in the forest that take pictures of movement and deers late at night. The soldiers found 2 pictures in the camera with 2 little girls, alone, next to a deer, way past midnight. Since then, they don't step into the forest late at night. They conclude that one of the girls was wearing a Navajo dress perhaps, in a place miles away from civilization and a caged property. I have the 2 pictures. I've seen them. It is one girl about 4, and alone in the woods, and the deer are around, and there's one that's a bit older, maybe 8, looking at a deer while another deer is looking directly at her. They're not that far away. The girls are practically pet distance from the deer. My sister and I had just received a tent as a gift from our grandfather. He had smoked enough Marlboro cigarettes and sent in the UPC to get a massive Marlboro tent. My mum hated it. We, however, loved it and immediately set it up on the property line behind the house. We intended on spending the night out there, but after an hour or 2, we experienced something neither of us can explain away to this day. We saw an indentation drag itself across the tent, and heard it dragging as well. It was like a giant finger or perhaps log, something of that size. My sister cried out and I immediately bolted outside, and I was convinced it would be our father playing a prank on us. Upon exiting the tent, however, I was greeted by something far more terrifying. Nothing. There was nothing there. I searched the area briefly before grabbing my sister and going inside. About a week later, I ventured out to the tent again, only to realize it was gone. I ran inside and asked my mother where it was, and she replied saying that she had thrown it away because it had tears in it. Confused, I tried to convince myself she was lying and had only thrown it out because she was anti-smoking and thought the tent looked trashy. But I feared that she was telling the truth. The second event happened one full morning, about an hour before my alarm went off for school. I was jolted out of bed by what I can only describe as an otherworldly shriek. It came from the woods. It didn't sound human, but didn't sound animal either. Foxes and coyotes live in the woods, but they don't make sounds like that, and I was fairly well versed in the sounds of the woods, having lived near here. There was also this one time, in the evening, my father and I were up late having one of our classic all-night arguments. As we finally wrapped up our night at 3 a.m., my father said he wanted to read a verse from the Bible in order to close on a positive note of peace. As he began to read out loud, the same, or at least very similar, otherworldly shriek boomed through the house. It had to have been just outside the kitchen window, but it was so loud that it sounded almost like it was in the house. We immediately ran around the house trying to find what the hell made such a sound, and it even awoke my siblings and mother, who helped search in the confusion. About a half hour later, we all sort of gave up and went to bed scratching our heads. Time passed, and in my senior year of high school, I got a cat. She was an outdoor cat, but we would let her into the garage to sleep every night, mostly due to the coyotes and potential bad weather and whatnot. She would always come home before we shut the garage door, because if she did not, she would be locked out. One night she didn't show. I didn't think much of it, as cats can sometimes go on long hunting/mating excursions, only to return in 2 to 3 days like nothing happened. We assumed this was the case. After not seeing her for a solid week, I went and explored the area behind my house, the fields, and of course the woods. I think I found her. Because I honestly couldn't tell. It looked like her, but she had been seemingly turned inside out. I stared at the remains for about a minute before turning back home. I don't know what kind of animal would do that to my cat, but I think there might be something odd going on in the woods. I used to live near a really well-known forest. It was claimed to be haunted, known as Black Forest. Now this forest is super creepy, and as you can imagine, dark, hence the name. I had one very scary and startling experience while driving through this forest, which made me never step foot in the area again. On a weekend, I was invited to go hang out with some friends, and I had nothing else to do, so I agreed. It was around 8 or 9, and it was dark out. Now, there are 2 ways I could get to my friend's house. 1, go through Black Forest, or 2, go around the forest and add 20 minutes to my journey. I usually avoid the forest because the roads are somewhat confusing, and I just couldn't see very well, there being no lights and all. However, today, I was impatient, and decided to go through the forest. The ride to my friend's house was very uneventful, but the darkness of it all was very unpleasant to say the least. I stayed at my friend's house and started to head back around midnight, or near enough 1 a.m. Now, this is when I had my experience. While I was driving, I looked at my GPS a lot, because of the roads, and I always wanted to check where I was going because some of these roads look like an actual road, but are merely driveways for a lot of these houses. I didn't want to trap myself in someone's driveway, so I checked my GPS a lot. So I was driving and came to a stop in front of a red light, right under a very dim street light. It was still pitch black, and I was the only one on the road. As I was getting there, I got a very weird feeling as if someone was watching me. I then looked to my passenger side door, only to see this glowing, zombie-looking-like man, wearing what I could only describe as rags. He didn't look alive. His skin looked like it was falling off. He was very grey in colour, and was just staring at me. I really thought my heart was going to explode because I was so scared. Even though the light was red, I floored it. But I wanted to see if the thing staring into my car was actually real. And right as I crossed through the median, I looked back. Nothing was there, and there was nowhere he could have gone that fast. I was spooked and drove all the way home, trying not to hit any red lights. This was right before a huge forest fire. I was walking with a friend, and we liked exploring hiking trails and stuff, and came across a small grassy field in the middle of the woods. Nothing too special about it, but the area was surreal, as it felt very out of place. We thought maybe it was an area cut down by loggers or something, but just appeared to be too natural for that. We sat down and took the area in, sun shining with shades from the trees surrounding the area, and it felt like something from a Zelda game in the woods. Weeks later, we were going to shoot a video for a school project, and thought, let's shoot it back at that spot. We explored the whole area again to find nothing but woods, and never found that random field again, and tried years later to no avail. I'm not a big believer in the supernatural, but it makes me scratch my head to this day. This event happened around 2013 when I was 14 years old. I've never experienced hallucinations in my life, and my family has neither. Back then, the Slender Man hype was at its peak, and of course I wanted to reenact the game with my brother. So I drew some figures similar to the game on some A4 paper sheets and went into the woods next to my residence. It was midday, and my brother, 2 years younger than me, was fiddling with some sticks at the entrance to the woods. Meanwhile, I was nailing the sheets of paper to some trees. Even though it was sunny, I felt like this place had a weird vibe to it this day. So dumb me continued nailing the papers to trees, thinking that the atmosphere would make the game even better. About 10 to 15 minutes later, I started nailing the papers,
I came upon an old fallen tree with its roots sticking out of the ground. As I passed it, I felt something strange going on. It wasn't a sound, just a feeling that I had to turn around. As I did exactly that, I saw an approximately 2.5 meter tall figure, all black except its face, standing around 4 to 5 meters away from me. It had no facial features and just stood there watching me. The whole encounter lasted about 2 seconds before I was turned back around, screamed at the top of my lungs and bolted towards my brother's location. I was in total panic, running like my life depended on it. I felt relieved when I saw my brother fiddling with some rocks on the side of the road. I tried to explain what happened to him, but he thought I was messing with him. The game was cancelled, and I made sure to stay by his side while taking off all the pictures I'd nailed to trees. I went back to the spot of the encounter with him, examined it clearly, trying to tell myself I'd just seen an illusion or something, but nothing even remotely resembled the figure. I kept this encounter mostly to myself. I never told it anywhere, thinking people would write it off as a troll post or spooky story. My family are also heavily religious, and I doubt they'd believe me. The whole thing happened in France, in the 92nd department. To this day, I still have no explanation to what I saw. Could it have been an entity of some kind? I didn't get a clear look, but my instincts told me to run. But I'm sure that there was something there.
In Maine in springtime, I was staying on a remote farm in a converted barn. Of course it was at night, and I was going out to my van through a tall grass field to get my smokes, about 100 yards away. I didn't bring my headlamp because the moon was out, and on my way back there was a tree stump in the trail that I didn't notice before. I stopped, mystified, trying to catch its outline. It stood on 2 legs. I nearly crapped myself. It was about 3 to 4 feet tall and hobbled over to me, like it had a limp. I ran into the barn and yelled at my friend to come out, but she was as pale as a ghost, and she said to never talk about it again with her. Earlier that day, you see, we'd been exploring the woods nearby and came upon a weird stone circle in the woods. Wasn't much, but the rocks were partially buried and overgrown, like with weeds, as if they'd been there for a long time. Another weird note is that this thing, whatever it was, walked exactly like the lady who owned the land. She had polio as a child and walked with a limp. It was really weird. No idea what it was, and perhaps I don't want to know. We were camping at Long Beach, Washington, for the Kite Festival, and decided to take a late-night drive. We found ourselves on some back roads in the woods, cruising along slowly, with no music on and the windows down. No other cars but us, and suddenly everything just felt wrong. It was dark, but the lights seemed different somehow. I remember the hair on the back of my neck standing up, and just having the thought, this isn't right. We shouldn't be here. I look over and my wife is wide-eyed, clearly feeling the same way. I decided to pull over so I could turn around and head back the way we came. Then we noticed deer coming out of the woods and standing on the sides of the road, and they were just staring at us. We realized the woods are oddly quiet, which just made things seem more strange. We look up and the branches are full of birds on both sides of the road. There must have been hundreds of them, all perched and alert. My wife said, "We need to go." So we left. Eventually, once we had gone far enough, everything seemed normal again. I'm a pretty big fan of the idea of multiple worlds and dimensions, and honestly wonder if we accidentally drove through a thin spot and briefly wound up somewhere we shouldn't have been. Growing up, I lived right in front of a cattle field that wasn't used for half the year. The owner gave me and my brother permission to fish and walk around the woods in the fields when his cattle weren't there. We often took advantage of it over the summer breaks. My older brother had started skateboarding one year, and our stepmom hated it, so we'd go into the woods to keep her from knowing. We found a really run-down small house in the middle of it, along with concrete slabs nearby. The concrete wasn't suitable for purpose due to the steep slants seeping into the dirt, so naturally the house was where he practiced. We had videos of pics of him skateboarding in this building within the property lines. He also had barbed wire fencing around the property, so we knew we were within its limits. One day in passing, my brother mentioned doing work to it to stabilize it so that we could use it for skateboarding, and the owner of the land looked utterly confused, saying he's brailed the cornfield and walked the woods a million times and that there was no building whatsoever. He confirmed the concrete, but not the small shed thing about 5 yards away. He even said at one point that when he purchased it there was one, but he tore it down because it was in the way of bailing. He eventually said that maybe it was just us using the docks by the pond, but being in the heat all summer made us imagine the building. But there's no way we imagined the whole thing, and what made it worse was that we moved before we got to go back next summer to see if it was still there. One of my older brothers, when he was around 12, was walking through the forest with his best friend when something started throwing gravel stones at them from the tree line. They ran into the forest chasing after it with their flashlights but found no one. He's never been back since after dark. Their same brother just a few months ago was dropping a friend off at my grandparents' house as he was driving by our old home, which lies across from the forest. A very old lady was slowly walking across the middle of the road, clutching something to her chest. He thinks she was holding a shawl. It was raining, cold, in the middle of the night, so he pulled over and asked if she needed any help. As soon as he did, she began yelling and screaming at him while sprinting straight for his open window, all while holding her arms to her chest. He promptly reversed the hell out of the Dodge. There have been multiple sightings of a ghost lady wandering around clutching her baby to her bosom. Legend has it that she lost sight of her child and he got lost. His body was found several days later, and to this day she holds him in her arms and yells at anyone trying to enter the forest at night. One particularly messed up story involves a guy that as early as 2016 was studying waterfowl and local birds, and followed some ducks off the beaten path and deep into the woods. His cell phone mysteriously died and wouldn't turn on. It was at that moment a lady came walking through the woods clutching something to her chest. He hid behind a tree and she wandered off. He followed her out of curiosity, as she was acting strangely and it was nearly dusk and raining on top of everything else. They were miles from the nearest trail, and as he followed her, he stumbled upon 3 tiny shed-like houses. As he did, his adrenaline jumped to 11, and he lost all sense of hearing. The lady was standing in the middle of the house, clutching something to her chest, smiling and flashing her teeth. His fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and he ran all the way out of the forest for his life. The moment he got away from her, his phone turned back on with 85% battery left of its own accord. Could it have been the same woman my brother saw? Was she involved in turning off everyone's phones at the time? Come to think of it, the creeper was standing near the exact spot it happened when I saw it. Other locals have reported hearing inexplicable shrieking coming from various entrances of the woods at night. My girlfriend was driving to my grandparents a few months back, and she herself saw a bunch of bunnies in a circle standing still as she drove by, in the exact spot my mother had years before. I'm from South Jersey and spend a lot of time in the Pine Barrens camping, hiking, off-roading in my Jeep, etc. I started spending more time at Brendan T. Bryan State Forest over the last few years because of the off-road trails. There's a lake called Packin Pond along one of the main roads in the park, and it's a great place to go and park to look up at the stars. Something of note is that this state forest is about 15 miles from Joint Base McGuire/Fort Dix. To get right to it, I've seen strange and unexplainable lights in the trees in different areas of the forest. The first few times were while we were parked at Packham Road and stargazing, that I noticed small lights that would sometimes flicker or stay stationary just below the tree line, easily mistakable for stars. I didn't think too much of it until I realized that during the daytime the tree line was high enough that there's no way I could have been seeing stars through the thick foliage/tree line. I brought my wife with me the next time, specifically to try and show her these strange lights, and sure enough they were there. Not in the same spots, they just seemingly move. 2 years later, I went camping on Thanksgiving Eve with my old friend, and the park was pretty much empty because it was 30 degrees. All night long I could see the lights in the trees below the tree line. They perplex me. I have no clue what they are. I can't find anything about them online, so I think I need to do my own investigation. I don't know what to think. Could they be some sort of lights? Or fairies? I know it sounds ridiculous to say, but it just seems paranormal in nature. Anyone have any explanation? I'd love to hear about it. There was this one road that cut through a fairly deep forest that had train tracks running perpendicular and were also slightly elevated. It was pretty fun if you're in an SUV because you could get some air. However, if you were in a car, you couldn't see the other side, and if not exactly entirely in your lane, you would crash into an incoming car. Many people died there, and I think there was also some mythology around it, like a Native American burial ground or something. Anyway, we went ghost hunting, as we'd heard many rumors about that spot. And screw me if as soon as we were walking near the train tracks, some bright blue goddamn orbs popped out of nowhere, floating about 4 feet off the ground. It was maybe 12 feet in front of us and around 10 inches in diameter. We looked at each other to see if everyone else was seeing this, looked back at the orb, looked back at each other, and then booked our asses out of there. This is one of the craziest things I've ever seen, and I don't have a way to explain it. I've never really had paranormal experiences, but I cannot explain this. I'm in college, and me and some other 7 people from my school went on a backpacking trip, and we had 2 experienced leaders. We drove to the Saleski State Forest, which is in the Appalachian region of Ohio. It was early April this year, and it was cold, and everything was still dead from winter. After hiking miles into the forest, we set up a camp at the backpacking campsite, and there were a couple of other groups of people as well. A few of them were friendly older couples and 2 college-aged girls. Everyone was pretty spread out from each other, and we set up camp further away from everyone else. I've always been able to sense energies of places, and the energy in this area wasn't great. It was almost spooky. Each of us had an individual 1-person tent, and we formed a kind of cluster in this site, with my tent being in the back, so no one was behind me. Our cluster was also right next to the forest, because this backpacking site was like a big cleared-off square in the middle of the trees. Fast forward, I'm dead asleep around 2 a.m., and I wake up to leaves crunching right behind my tent. I hear footsteps walking in circles around my tent. They had a sort of heaviness to them that couldn't be a deer or a dog. Also, it sounded like just 2 legs. I cannot make this up. This creature was circling my tent for long periods of time, slowly creeping up the sides of my tent and then just stopping for periods of time, and would then move on to walking around the rest of our tent cluster. I could hear human-esque breathing when it was near my tent, like a light sort of heaving. I was shaking, too scared to unzip. I kid you not. This occurred for hours, and it seemed like I was the only one awake. Out of nowhere, I see an illuminated shape from my tent, although I couldn't tell what it was from inside, because it was all zipped up. It was like a glowworm, and it didn't move, like a flashlight would. I was paralyzed in fear, simply couldn't believe it was an animal, and at some point passed out due to sheer exhaustion. But I could hear their heavy footsteps circling until I did. In the morning, I questioned my fellow campers about it, and my leader admitted that she heard the footsteps and noises as well, admitting it was bizarre, and she would have investigated it had she not been so groggy. One of the boys in the group said he also noticed the light that came on, but thought it was someone else. Not a single person in this group went up to go to the bathroom or turned on a light at night. I've heard things about the Appalachian regions being creepy and bizarre, and now I believe it. When I was about 14, my friend and I went bow hunting on his dad's property. Mainly we just walked around the woods all day messing around. As it started to get dark, he called his dad to pick us up, so he would drive us to his mum's house. His dad asked us to wait at a certain spot right by the road at the edge of the property. It quickly got very dark, and for some reason, I don't even remember why, we waited sitting down facing each other about 50 feet from the road, in a spot that was pretty dense with trees. There was absolutely nothing around here but the road and the trees for at least a mile. We were talking about whatever 14-year-olds talk about when suddenly I saw light hitting my face. It came from above. I looked up, but I couldn't see what exactly or how high it was. It was very focused, white, and only seemed to hit my face, nothing around me. My friend also saw it, and both of us were very panicked and freaked out. The light hadn't come on, and then moved to my face. It was on me from the moment it came on. It shone for about 3, maybe 5 seconds, and then went back off. There didn't seem to be anything in the trees or above them, although it was damn dark, but we were both convinced it came from the trees. We heard nothing, even though the night was super quiet, and we both said nothing the moment it appeared. We booked it to the road and waited for his dad. I'm still freaked out by this some 15 years later. A buddy of mine had just bought a camera and liked playing around with the exposure open. Not sure about the terminology, but it's kind of a technique to make light look stretched and probably a billion other possibilities. So we took a few colored plastic cups and went out to the part of the woods where we knew there was a trail we could walk down. It was close to midnight because we wanted it to be dark out to be able to see the effect of the light. Me and a friend held the cups over our heads and used a flashlight on our phones to light up the cups. I had a phone that I had to start to record to be able to use the flashlight, and so I did. The plan was to start at the top of the hill and walk down towards the camera to create a sort of string of light. People who know stuff about cameras, feel free to correct me. As we walked down the hill, me and my buddy started chatting quickly, and I noticed his eyes were wide open looking at me, as if a creature had emerged from behind me. I asked him what was wrong, getting really scared immediately, as well as getting quiet. He says in a high-pitched voice, "You don't hear that?" And then I heard it. The sound of children's laughter. Both of us panicked and started running down the hill, and we got to our friend with the camera way too early and he says, "What the hell are you doing? You have to walk down slowly or you ruin the shot." We told him that we heard kids laughing in the woods, and he didn't believe us. Naturally, I realized I had the camera running, so maybe I caught something and played it back. The microphone picked it up perfectly. 2 or 3 kids around 6 or so in the middle of the woods. No house or guardian or light in sight. Needless to say, we noped out of there shortly after. I moved to my current residence with my family a few years back. I was around 12 and excited to settle into a new place. The house was new when we moved in, and it was only 7 years old, and there were never any accidents in it or the large backyard. On the border of the backyard was a government-owned forest you could walk through with trails. Our house had a pathway that led down into the forest. Me and my brothers were excited to go there, so a few days after settling in, our dad took us out. The whole hike was normal until we started coming back through the access that was made by the previous owners. When I was going through, I took a wrong turn where the path split. We were near the exit to our property, but I came across a split and took a wrong path. I walked a short distance to where our property should have been, but it wasn't there. I looked forward and just saw a field of sunflowers. The field of sunflowers must have been a large one because I couldn't see the tree line behind it. The field didn't make sense. It was located around where the property would start and seemed to be massive. My dad realized I was gone and called me back. The times I went through the woods after, I couldn't see the split in the path. Somewhat recently, I went through the woods with my brothers, and I accidentally, without realizing it, went through the split and found an empty field with no sunflowers. Both occurrences, where I went through a split, took place in summer. It's just a bit weird. Was it real? My brother is 2 years older, and we've probably spent 10,000 hours and then some in the woods together. Whether it was building forts or BMS tracks to LARPing and hunting, we've traveled across and explored caves, canyons, cliff diving, mountain biking, camping, hunting, whitetail mule deer, wild boars, etc. since 2016. I feel like adding this is important, because there's genuinely nothing I wouldn't do or fear when I have him by my side, but this time was different, and we both felt it. We've had our fair share of adventures and stories to share, but this one has left a lingering strain in my memory. We were both in our mid-20s, and it was 2019. This was probably my 5th time hunting the area, and at first I brought my brother along. It's a large forested area of public land that has a few country roads, which are all basically 2 tracks that stretch for miles throughout the area. We make the trip up in my truck with our tents, 3 in total, 1 for each of us and another to change in and keep our gear in. We set up camp a few miles from the truck, which we drove for quite a few miles through the trails, basically the middle of nowhere. Nearest the main road is probably 8 to 10 miles away. We arrived late in the night, set up camp, and quickly fell asleep after a long trip. We then spent the next day scouting and tracking, then made our way back to camp for the night. We cooked, then ate, had some beers and chatted, and the night was still early, but we had a long day and decided to head off for the night. Everything up until this point was normal. I was suddenly awoken to something smacking my tent and hearing my brother's voice call my name. I knew something was off. I called back to him, and he immediately unzipped my tent and made his way inside. I could tell he was disturbed when I went to ask him what was wrong, and he immediately grabbed my shoulder and told me to shush. The sun wasn't up yet, so I think it was around 4:30 to 5 a.m.-ish. We sat in my tent, and what we heard still confuses me to this day. I can only explain it as whale sounds, different tones of extremely loud noise that I could feel through my body. It would come and go, but there would only be a few seconds of silence between the sounds. It would vary from high-pitched squeals and everything in between to very low sounds that had been literally ground-shaking reverb. I regrettably didn't think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on because what I was hearing didn't seem real in the moment. The sound went on until daylight started to break. I believe it was about an hour, but I'm honestly not really sure. Neither of us spoke, and at the time it felt like I could feel the energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped that it started to rain, and one of the craziest thunderstorms while I was camping happened. The forecast didn't predict any amount of rain for the days we were going to be there prior to making the trip. All the stakes for the tent our gear was in completely ripped out of the ground, and both of our tents had multiple stakes ripped out too. Those things were drove into the ground with an axe, and would take some insane force to just unearth a single one. My brother dismisses it and won't even talk about it, saying it was just machinery being dragged. But at the time, we both shared the same feelings of fear and dread. Just seemed so odd that it was still the middle of the night, and we were so far removed from any nearby community. to hear and experience this occurrence. I live down in Georgia, deep in the country in Dublin, where the closest store is 6 miles away. I've lived in the country for half my life, recently returning to it. But let me elaborate on what happened. Me and my buddy Sean were sitting at our bonfire, as we have an RV, and when it gets dark out there, it gets very dark. So we were making jokes and talking about things and looking at the stars, when the dog we have on our side started barking and growling aggressively before going silent. So Sean and I got up, grabbed my shotgun, and walked over to check it out, thinking he just saw a raccoon or something. But when we made it over there, he was standing still staring into the woods, and we heard something mimic the way the dog was barking, but deeper, more guttural. I'm not really sure how to describe it accurately, but when we heard it, instead of investigating, we fled back to the RV, locked it, and the noises stopped. But later in the night, we heard something walking around the trailer slowly before going off. I'm not sure what it could have been, but we were very scared. So Sean and I had this girl, Liberty, round, and we decided to have a campfire that night, after the frustrations of having to fight the fire and be able to cook the hot dog and bratwursters. The thing is, we didn't have long enough metal poles. I built a fire that was too big, and it was hot. So we decided to leave the baby in the RV and just chill, have s'mores and hot dogs as we passed around lager. We started hearing noises that sounded like laughter in the woods, similar to mine. Then a bunch of mumbling, before all was quiet. The dog wasn't doing anything, and it hadn't barked all day or night. So we were freaked out a bit, but decided to stay outside and be ballsy and make jokes. But it stopped, and eventually, we cooled it back down and kept talking at the campfire. Then the motion lights behind the RV turned on, and went to go check. There was nothing. So we went back to our seats when the motion lights next to the dog pen turned on, and something dark was laying behind the dog fence, covered mostly by the hill that meant the road. You know how roads have sewer systems, and the ground dips before coming back up again. And when the lights turned off, and I shined the flashlights over there, nothing was there. So once again, pretty much paranoid, we returned to the fire, which was almost out, and Liberty said she saw something off to the side, which we sort of ignored, as she was quite scared and has schizophrenia. So between her demons, which she already sees, and what was real, we couldn't tell. After that, there were no incidences for a while, before I turned to my left. There's 2 trees right in front of the dog pen, and I decided to flash the flashlight over there, and I saw something duck behind the tree, something big and dark, which at that point we decided to call a night. We went back inside the RV, locked and shut all the doors and windows, and added covers to them. I'm sharing this with you almost immediately after it happened, and we're unsure what's going on. On our days off, after high school, my cousin and I would routinely drive my parents' golf cart around the neighborhood and into the back of the large neighborhood, because it was abandoned and completely overgrown. We knew all abandoned construction trails through the forest, and where they met back up to the roads that were completely unbothered by any suburban houses. It was broad daylight, probably around 2 or 3 p.m., and we had parked the golf cart coming off the trail and towards the concrete roads into the back part of the neighborhood. The grass on the unused lots was covered in weeds and grass that was probably 5 or 6 feet off the ground. We unleashed the pipe. We take a few hits, all is peaceful, the birds are singing, the air is clean, and he takes another hit and passes it to me. I start to light the bowl, and before I take a hit, I hear my cousin say my name twice, very seriously. I panic and think the cops have just pulled up or something, and I look at him, and he's staring straight ahead, shocked, and just says in a low voice, What the hell is that, cuz? I look up and down the road and see it. A little man peering out from the grass on the left side of the road about 20 feet away. It looks like he is a naked humanoid completely covered in mud and crouched down as low as a person can go while still being mobile. It's not human, but it is human-shaped. With both of us staring at this creature, he backs up slightly, and then it disturbs me to remember this. Rhodey runs faster than humanly possible across the concrete road and into the grass on the other side. It was like a human, moving as fast as an insect does when it panics. Imagine crouching down as far as you can without falling over, and then sprinting. The thing appears to do just that. No words needed. I disengage the parking brake and gas it. We drive all the way to the front of the neighborhood to the community center area probably a mile away, and decide we should probably just go home. Lots of frustrated swearing followed, because there was no rational explanation for it. We still talk about the story all the time. Funnily enough, about a year ago my parents moved to a bigger house about 100 feet from where this happened, once the neighborhood started building back there again. The second story must have been about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a year or two after the first. Very general timeline, but you get the idea. I was hanging out with a friend and his girlfriend, as well as his weed dealer, which is a guy I had kind of grown knowing for a while. I had stopped smoking by then, but everyone was good company, and I would have a few beers with them while they did their thing. After a while it became apparent that we would have to give the dealer a ride back, and we decided we would just go all together and could take my car. So we did. It must have been about 9 or 10 in the evening. The dealer's house is a straight shot down the main road for about 15 minutes. We get onto the main road through the city, and everything is completely normal for a while. We're almost to the neighborhood, and suddenly, police, lights, we get pulled over into a well-lit gas station right into the middle of the whole routine, and it unfolds. The officer accuses me of pulling out in front of someone while trying to make a right turn, despite us having all green lights and riding in the middle of 3 lanes. His reason for pulling us over was so incomprehensible, but he ends up recognizing the guy in the front seat, the dealer, who unfortunately didn't have anything on him. So cut waiting around, and 3 more cop cars show up, and the drug-sniffing dogs. Of course, the dogs hits off on nothing, and we get the whole kit and caboodle of stepping out while they were searching the car. Here's when the fun starts, because they begin pulling out a lot of my occult stuff, like an athame and wooden chest full of sigils and candles and some other mobile all-purpose stuff. What are you guys, some kind of devil worshippers? I roll my eyes and open the trunk for them. Nothing there but a black robe and a Ouija board that I've used for years. Of course, they take both out and wave it around and make fun of it some more. The encounter ends without any great dramatization because they expectedly found nothing. I loathed that they had tossed around all my tools, but I'm a pretty level-headed practitioner. We drive the dealer to his house and part ways and head back to my friend's house to mess around and have beers. I head home around 2 or 3 and go to bed. Let me forewarn you that I have never had sleep paralysis or apnea. I don't dream particularly all that often or spectacularly, and I can't recall a single instance of experiencing a hallucination in my life. So when I see things, I know there's more to it. I don't wake up. I'm still asleep. I feel like my spirit is brought to the surface of a deep water. I open my eyes but still can't see. And there is a really weird noise, a rhythmic whooshing that is bringing me to wakefulness. My vision slowly expands outwards from the center of a blue tinge, very unusual, and I immediately become aware of the fact that I'm not alone, and I look into the room that expands out from the foot of my bed. It glows blue because of the moonlight coming in from the windows at the opposite end. A few feet out from the foot of my bed is a high-top round table with 2 high-top stools on either side. I can hardly see it, because there, a perfectly silhouetted goat-man-looking being, perhaps even 7 feet tall, sitting on the high top stool closest to me, is facing my direction, with moose-like horns, and the source of the whooshing is his breath, as if he'd just run very hard. I can't see his features, but he's obviously looking right at me, and I'm looking at him. I blink. I'm experiencing sleep paralysis, I think. I blink more, and I become very afraid that there really is a 7-foot-tall goat man sitting in my bedroom, as this is not a usual predicament that I have to face. I probably stare for about 10 seconds before I get hit with the sort of communicated feeling that the being has just come from doing something very awful to some people, one person in particular, and then rushed here to alert me to it. The breathing slows a little after another 10 seconds, and the being moves to get off the stool, the table behind him shifting, and creaks as it does so. As soon as he hits the ground, he just fades out. I'm baffled, afraid, and relieved. I get up, turn the lights on, walk around the house, and everything is effectively normal. I sit and think about the whole thing, and the police incident didn't even connect in my head for 5 or 10 minutes. I go out for a smoke to observe the lake out back, and the sky because the moon was bright and beautiful. It might have been a full moon, but I can't really remember. I calm down, go back to bed, having been relieved by the connection of the events that I had made. I don't remember what time this happened because I never looked, but it seemed like the middle of the night. I never had any further happenings in the vein of this experience or seeing anything in the night, and I've never seen the being again. The last story wasn't super long after the Guardian of the Ouija board, probably less than a year. I worked at a movie theatre during this whole time period, and I had taken to jogging at around 2 or 3 a.m. after work, perfectly serene and safe. There was never anybody awake or driving around the house, and it was on a small triangle-shaped configuration of roads situated around the lake, with one road going through the forest to get back to the main neighborhood. That road was on the other side of the lake from where I was. I come out of the garage and start walking down the road, and shortly come up to the first turn. The orange of the street lamps keeps the roads pretty decently lit, but the orange lamps cast a spooky feeling. As I round the corner on the sidewalk, I see another jogger down the other way on the other side of the road. I think about how odd it is to see another jogger at this time of night, so I slow down and kind of stare. It occurs very quickly that he is not another jogger, because most joggers are not 8-foot-tall, ghostly shadow beings taking 6 footsteps. Due to the confusion, I don't even feel anything as I watch this tall, lanky shadow being run all the way down the road right in front of me, and in between 2 houses and into the woods. He made absolutely no sound at all as he passed right in front of me, down the middle of the road. I saw where his hands and feet should have been. There was nothing but a fade to mist. After seeing that, and taking a moment to process, I decided if an interdimensional shadow being was running at full sprint away from something, then I probably should be too. So I turned around and noped out of there back to my garage to sit in existential terror. After 30 minutes, I decided that I was going to conquer my fear and run around the triangle like I intended, before having a paranormal incident. I succeeded, terrified, and fortunately nothing happened on that attempt. Anyway, these are the stories from my parents' neighborhood. I'm not sure if the sightings have any relation to the forest, but I have a strong feeling that they do in some way. I'm an occultist, sure, but stories of this nature are far from different in substance than seeing unexplained beings unprovoked. Thank you for listening. This happened to me the other night, in New Jersey. If you're sitting on my couch and you turn around about 15 to 20 feet away, there'll be a big sliding glass door, which will lead you to my porch. If you go down the steps and walk around 50 feet, you'll be met with the pines or pine barrens. If you pay attention to urban legends, you may recognize these woods as the same woods the Jersey Devil lives in. That's the context. It was around 9, and I was sitting on the couch talking to 2 friends and just watching TV. We're having a good time when I realized that one of my friends is looking out back with a puzzled look on his face. I asked him what the matter was, and he says something along the lines of, "No, nothing, I just thought I saw something in your backyard." So I turn around for a split second, and I see what appears to be two heads peering from around a tree, then immediately duck behind again. At this point, I'm like, holy crap, what is that? So my friend grabs a kitchen knife and runs out onto the porch, just yelling for whoever it is to leave. I run out and tell him it's fine and to go back inside. This time I see three heads, all closer than before, so I shout to get away and that I have a gun, but I'm bluffing. Then I see them dart behind the tree again, and they're gone. Still have no idea what that is, but I'd love some answers. When I was 6, my family owned a fair bit of land around one of the most populous springs in the area. As long as my mum or dad came with me, I was free to trot off into the woods. Well, one day my dad is home, and off we go to mess around. Mostly I just ran around burning off my little kid energy, and that's just what I'm doing. The trees aren't dense, probably about 10 feet between them, but there are a lot of trees, a lot of dead leaves covering the ground that haze you whenever you get too deep into the woods. Well, I wind up lost. I know I'm somewhere on our land, but I don't recognize where. I just see trees and leaves for as far as the eye can see, and the ground is littered with old rusted wheels, bed frames, and other various garbage in no particular order. And it had to have been there a while. Being 6, I do the logical thing and freak out, start to cry and screaming for my dad. After a minute of this, I hear him shout, "Hold on," and not to move. I keep crying. A few seconds pass and I'm still shouting when I hear him say, from what I think is a different direction, "I'm right over here, follow my voice." A few seconds later, I hear him yell again, "Almost there, hold on." Then a few seconds later again, "I'm right over here, just come here." This goes on for about a minute, and I break down even more, because he's telling me two different things. I just curl up and cry. He linebackers his way into view, grabs me, and pulls me up. I'm not hurrying away, but he just calms me down, and then he walks off. I tell him he shouldn't have kept telling me to come to him after saying stay there, and he tells me he never said that, and that if you're lost in the woods near someone, the best thing to do is to stay put, so that they can find you. And the whole conversation was never discussed again. When I was in middle school, I was friends with a kid who had an unusual home. For starters, it had a basement. This is effectively considered a bad move in the state of Florida. Weirder yet, cell phones didn't work inside his house at all. And the second you step outside his front porch, boom, all your signal's back. Anyway, outside the signal is back, but his place was cool and it was built next to an old, dried up riverbed. It was super fun to play on it since it was all his parents' property. Naturally, we stayed friends through high school, and his place became the de facto hangout spot for the majority of us despite the cell phone weirdness. It got significantly creepier, however, once the red eyes started appearing. I have to pause here and fill in what this was. After the breakthrough of smartphones, but before apps were commonplace on them. And this meant there were no flashlight apps or anything like that. Angry Birds didn't even exist yet, and the attached keyboard was the newest craze. You see, his house was literally a few hundred feet from a major highway, but through just enough trees to dampen the noise of most vehicles. And when most of us had our licenses and started to spend erratic weekends there, the red eyes showed up. They were easily described, two evenly spaced small crimson-colored lights that would just appear on the property, often just on the other side of the fence from where we were parked, and the very edge of where his floodlights reached. They would linger for a few seconds, abruptly go out, and then appear elsewhere, usually 10 or so feet away, maybe a different height, and they would do this for an apparently random amount of time and eventually just disappear. They were bright enough that I once decided on the spot I was going home in the morning, because I got to his front door, saw them staring at me through the house, and decided I needed to go. A couple of my buddies bravely went out at night to try and figure out what that was, and I did not go with them.
But there were 4 of them, and probably half an hour later me and someone else are sitting on the porch getting some fresh air and drinking sodas when they come screaming out of the woods, and rather than take a set of gates, just jump the fence immediately. What I was told was they just got out of sight of the house and had been sweeping the area when, as a group, they suddenly felt watched. They heard something rustling through the leaves and bamboo clusters, and they swept the light over the area around them to try and see something, but nothing showed up. Suddenly, part of the cluster just bent and broke, so they hightailed it out of there. They finished relaying the story, and of course we're calling BS on them before the guy sitting with me gets up and looks out into the woods. There, burning brightly, is the same damned pair of crimson eyes staring at the house, and then they blink out and come back on, heading towards the gates. Naturally, we get back inside. We still don't know what caused them as a collective. We've seen them probably about 100 times on or off, with different groups of people, so the makeup of people was never quite the same. His dad was adamant it was taillights from the road that went through those woods, but we really didn't buy that because we've been to that road. It's a bridge over the gap where the river used to be, and it's easy to get to, you just have to follow the river bend, because the trees and vines are denser than it's worth going around them. Even then, it's a 20-ish minute hike to a large fence the height of the bridge that you have to scale through, and a couple of 100 feet on the bridge itself. There's no way you'd see the lights of anything that far out, and even if you did, it wouldn't be on and off flickering, not what we saw. The closest answer I've gotten is an obscure Floridian spirit known as the Red Eyes or Old Red Eye, depending on the tale. Although the details are pretty fuddled, it's considered something that was made up recently. The story, depending on the title, goes that the lights are the eyes of a spirit that was either a Native American or an escaped slave/conductor along the Underground Railroad. They were tasked with helping others on their escape, and they were a sort of lookout for hostile patrolmen in the area, and were, if they encountered them, supposed to lure them away or scare them off the trail that used to be used. A last-ditch effort was to kill them if necessary. Needless to say, the ghost was one of these people that died during their duty and now haunt the area they died in. And if you don't give them the password or gesture, they get more aggressive. So, that's the story. My boyfriend and I are solidly freaked out at what happened the last 2 nights, as it had me convinced something bad is in the woods behind his house. For context, my boyfriend lives in northeast Pennsylvania in the boonies. He has an expanse of at least 500 acres of woods behind his home. There are no power sources for any structures in the woods, and the man who owns the property already told us there's nothing out there that he's aware of that could be used causing this. We've talked to the neighbors, and they are just as confused as we are. You see, for the last month we have been seeing a bright light in the middle of the woods behind my boyfriend's house. I want to say about 3/4 of a mile away. Big and bright enough to see through the trees. It comes on around dusk and goes out about 10 p.m. It's the same spot every single night. We had gone out during the day to investigate if there were any power lines or deer stands with solar lights or anything like that, but found nothing. Just wilderness. Last night, my boyfriend decided to go out and investigate on his own. I asked him to not go alone, but he armed himself to the teeth with firearms and made his way in the dark after spotting the light. He gets about 200 yards from where this light is and it vanishes. Gone. Does a 360 to look for it and sees nothing. He's texting me during all of this, and immediately I told him to get the hell out of there. The night previous I had been over, and around 9:30 we pulled up to the house after getting something to eat, and I looked into the woods. I didn't see a light, but I was immediately gripped with that primal fear that something was watching us. I was so terrified once I got inside the house, I couldn't look through the windows without wanting to burst into tears. I've never experienced that fear at his home before. I'm used to his woods and the dark, but this was different. So he heeds my warning and starts trekking back to his house. He gets up a hill about halfway back and turns to see the light has reappeared.
only it's much lower to the ground. He watches it for a while, and it begins to move through the trees. Behind his property is a large pipeline right-of-way, so there is an open kind of field before the tree line, and it comes through the tree line and into the field at the bottom of this hill. He watches it and tells me it's moving very slowly, but the light is bright and large. He says the wind was still blowing and swirling around him, but nothing was blowing directly on him, and he felt like he was being watched. The light begins to move up the hill towards him, and he makes a run back to his house and jumps into his truck, because whatever it is, he doesn't want it to follow him inside the house. Now this vehicle is backed in the driveway and facing away from the woods, so he can see what's going on in his rearview mirrors. He sits for 10 minutes and says the eerie feeling is gone. I tell him to wait. He begins to see some flashes of light. He's on the phone with me at this point, and he sounds scared, and he's pretty damn fearless. I've never heard him this worried. Then he says he saw a figure pass in front of a mower he has sitting in the yard that he can see in his rear view. It's here. Something's here. This rifle isn't going to do a damn thing. He sits in silence with me on the phone. Something passed in front of the streetlight. Something's making a shadow on the streetlight. Mind you, it's only his house and his neighbor's house across the street about 200 yards away. One streetlight at the right corner of his house. There's a shadow passing through this light about 10 feet up in the air. I tell him to put on his late grandfather's coat and make a run for the house. He gets inside and said the feeling was still with him. His dog isn't acting strange, but his bedroom door is wide open, and so's his basement too. His entire house was locked up right when he left, and his basement door is always shut. It swings out too, so the dog couldn't have opened it, and his bedroom door was shut before he left. Swings in but was latched closed, again something the dog can't open. Nothing else seemed to transpire for the rest of the evening, and he didn't see anything weird outside the windows. By the time the adventure was over, it was about 10 p.m. This all transpired during the course of 2.5 to 3 hours. So it's safe to say we will probably be heading out again sometime this week together and try to figure out what the light is again. It made no noise, was way too big to be a flashlight, and we are just scared out of our wits and dumbfounded as to what it could be. With that being said, the floor is open to theories or similar experiences any of you have to share.